On this episode of the DTVC podcast, Will from Exploding Helicopters on, and we'll be looking at Nepo Babies. We'll be looking at Scott Eastwood in Dangerous, which also has Tyrese Gibson and Mel Gibson, not related, but so they're not Nepo Babies, but Scott Eastwood, of course, he's going to be in that. And the other one's going to be 211 with Weston Cage, which also stars his dad, Nicolas Cage, who's celebrating his birthday today. So he's going to be 61 today. So happy birthday to Nicolas Cage. But yeah, stay tuned. We'll have that coming up in a few minutes. And then next week, Ty from Quotes is on, and we're going to be looking at hip-hop stars in direct-to-video movies. So we're going to be looking at Turf War with Fat Joe. And then we're going to be looking at Blood Money with Pitbull. So stay tuned for that next week. I'll have that one come out next week. And then we've got the rest of the month scheduled out. So just get those recorded and in the can. And definitely stay tuned for those as well. And then in terms of the DTVC Extra podcast, speaking of Nicolas Cage, who is turning 61 today, I'm not sure when these episodes are going to happen, but I was realizing that 3 of the 4 kind of main 90s actioners that Nicolas Cage did are on streaming. I can't remember which 3 of the 4, but you got Face Off, you've got Snake Eyes, Con Air, and The Rock. That kind of that foursome there that he did in the 90s. I thought that would be kind of a fun one to cover. Do kind of 2 episodes on 2 of those movies at a time. So that'll probably be the next time we do DTVC Extra. So keep an eye out for that. Again, probably won't be something I announce. We'll see. I might do socials for it as well, but I'm not sure when those are going to come. I don't know that January is a busy month for me, but it's busy enough. So we'll kind of see. We'll see where I can fit those in there. But yeah, just keep an eye out for those possibly coming. In terms of the site, we've got this week. Right now, tentatively scheduled is King of the Killers, and that's probably what I'll probably end up doing, but we'll see. If I get something else in the can before then, I might bump King of the Killers back a week. We'll see. That was another one that I did with Ty on one of those 2-episode movies that we do together. So that's tentatively what we've got coming, but we'll see if that happens. And then just yesterday, I posted a movie called Dead Before They Wake. It's Nate Shepka's newest film. A really great movie. It's available today on VOD and DVD here in the States. I think it's the 24th that it's available in the UK. But yeah, he hit another one out of the park. This one's, it's dark. It deals with trafficking, but not kind of the cutesy trafficking that we see in American direct-to-video movies. This is more dark. This is more tense. But the performances are really great. The story really flowed well. So you can see the review on my site. I do have a spoiler alert because I wanted to talk about the end a little bit. So keep an eye out for that spoiler alert. But yeah, definitely check that out. This is definitely a good movie to support. I know next month they have another movie coming out called The Baby in the Basket. So we'll see if that one comes out then. But for right now, Dead Before They Wake, definitely check that one out. I think that's everything. Of course, the big one, my newest book, Nadia and Aiden, that is available paperback, Kindle. You can find the link in the podcast description. So always appreciate when people want to check that one out. So people have been buying it lately. Haven't heard any returns yet, so we'll see. Maybe people haven't had a chance to read it yet, which is fine. It's not the worst thing in the world if you buy it and don't read it. Yes, I always prefer the feedback. I always like it when people read it and say they enjoyed it or didn't like it. That kind of thing. But hey, if you buy it and it just sits on your shelf, or hell, you buy it on Kindle and it just sits in your phone or in your Kindle account and you never read it. One thing to keep in mind is I get paid the same amount whether it's Kindle or paperback. So even though you pay a lot less for Kindle, I get roughly the same in royalties for that. So don't feel like you're shortchanging me if you got to do it on Kindle. I'll still get I get paid either way. So and I always appreciate any support people want to do for those kinds of things. All right, that is everything. So why don't we have John Crossman after we move down to playing our theme song here, and then when we come back, Will from Exploding Helicopter, if I can say his name, but I'm not sure I can. Will from Exploding Helicopter is going to be on, and we'll be looking at Nepo Babies. right, welcome back to the DTVC podcast. As always, this is Matt here, and I am joined once again by very special guest, Will from Exploding Helicopter. Welcome back, Will.
Hello, Matt. Good to be here once again.
Yeah. Now you've been on quite a bit. We've had a lot of different themes. We've had two non-bonds where we talked about different James Bond actors who ended up doing other films or did direct-to-video movies. We've done some Craig Fairbrass double features, Olga Kurylenko. Um, Also, virtual reality movies from the '90s. So we've done some. We've kind of gotten away from the exploding helicopter and done some really fun ones. This is going to be maybe the most interesting. And I mean, one category we can group these movies into, the category we planned on grouping them into was nepotism, right? That was the main theme for this episode.
It certainly was. Yeah, I don't know. It just came to me in a flash of inspiration when you were we were batting around ideas for this podcast, and yeah, nepotism. It's a sort of issue in the acting world that kind of bubbled up to the surface. I don't know, like a year or so ago, there were like a whole bunch of sort of articles about it, but it's always something that I have been interested in as somebody who, like, I love my action films. I love my exploding helicopter films, but I'm also like a true film buff. I love, reading and watching films, going back all the way to the beginnings of Hollywood. And nepotism, it's as old as Hollywood itself. It's certainly not a new phenomena.
No, we were thinking about the Barrymore family, right? I mean, John
Yeah.
Barrymore. Yeah, I mean, you're definitely,
Carradines, they
yeah.
go all the way back to those very earliest days as well. So yeah.
Yeah. Now another area that I was thinking about with these films. I mean, now I don't know if growing up when you were younger, if you ever had these activity books that had these outlines of drawings in them where the drawing itself would be sectioned off into little pieces that had numbers, and those numbers would correspond to colors. And you would put the colors in those little sections. I guess in a sense, you'd be like painting by number, essentially. I don't know if that's something that you ever partook in.
I can't say I did, but I think I've heard of. I think I've heard people talk about these books.
Yeah, like for example, Spider-Man, right? All the blues would be number one, and so you'd fill in the number
Ah,
one with
okay.
blue and the red. Yeah, and I can't help but feel like these movies here also. There's a lot of points where there's numbers where it's like, okay, we're gonna put this piece in here that you're expecting.
I'm shocked, Matt. Shocked that you are suggesting that there may be there may be a sort of an issue of formula in DTV films.
Exactly. Yes, and I was now I should warn people in terms of spoiler alerts because we are going to have to talk about some of these things because the first of these two movies we're going to talk about here, Dangerous, actually subverts a few of those paint by numbers. So I think that could be kind of interesting. When we get in on that. But talking about the term, the nepotism that concept. I looked it up online. I don't know if you'd looked this up before, like where the term nepotism comes from.
I can't say I have, so feel free to school me, Matt.
So it actually comes from the obviously nepotism is something that has existed since we've had government and communities and things like that where there's been a need for that. Obviously, when we were food foraging bands going across Africa, groups of like 20 and 30 walking 20-mile stretches from watering hole to watering hole, there really wasn't any need for nepotism, right? Like, what are you going to do? You're going to bequeath your arrows to somebody else? Like, it wasn't really, one of the many things that farming became an issue, right? When we decided to live a sedentary life. But really, I mean, essentially, I think as long far back as like ancient Mesopotamia, there's been nepotism. But the term itself actually comes from Italy in the like 17th century, or actually they said it came from like the medieval period till the 17th century. I guess popes, because popes they didn't have kids, right? They would, or they
Mm.
technically weren't supposed to have had kids. But they would have nephews, or they would have illegitimate kids that they would call nephews, uh, and so they would give these kids like cardinals and bishop roles when they were the pope, and so the Italians took the term nephew from Latin, nepo or like nepotismo or something like that. Uh,
Ah.
yeah, and so that's where it comes from. Now, the process was banned. There were some, I guess, according to Wikipedia, I looked it up. There were some egregious popes who like were really bad at it, and essentially it was one of these things where like one of them would like let their nephew become a bishop or cardinal, and then they would use that as a stepping stone to become pope themselves, and then make further nephews bishops and cardinals, and so they essentially just were like, no, we're not doing this anymore. And Wikipedia does it mostly from a government standpoint. Like when they give examples of it, like probably the most recent would be Trump with his son-in-law,
Mm.
you know, essentially selling off properties in his father's underwater property in New York to the highest bidder to get favors politically. Um, but you make a great point about the Hollywood nepotism because one of the more fascinating things about Hollywood is that I guess there's two pieces, right? It's that any of the arts, there's a sort of a gate to get in to get access. It's not easy to be an actor. It's not easy to kind of make it up in the business, but also actors have a name that they can trade on that is really important, right? That it's not just the position itself, but also the name recognition that helps.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they're like branded goods, aren't they? And it's always
Yeah.
interesting on that point. Is like, okay, what does does the beneficiary of this nepotism, do they use their famous father or famous mother's name, or do they try and strike out on their own using, I don't know, like a maiden name, or perhaps some name that the name that they adopt in order to try and, I don't know, make it on their own. But even when they do that, you have to wonder if they're still not benefiting from the helpful introductions that one of their parents happens to make, and so forth. So yeah, it's interesting that when people keep their name or when they change their name.
Well, and what's interesting about this first movie we're going to be talking about, Dangerous, with Scott Eastwood, he even kind of sounds like his dad in the 70s and 60s and 70s kind of roles.
Yeah, he definitely does, and he sort of grinds his teeth together sometimes in a similar way to his dad as well. So I don't know whether he's consciously doing that, or whether that's something that's programmed into his DNA.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And we think of in the DTV world as well, it's not even just like kids, right? It's family members. You think of like in direct to video movies where it's Don Swayze or Frank Stallone. How many of these names that it's just like to be able to put a last name on the cover that says Stallone or Swayze when it's not that person. It's sort of a classic ploy as well.
Yeah, what's that film? Is it Death? Is it Death Ring? Or
I
Blood
think
Ring?
so.
With
Yeah.
with Norris, Swayze, and I can't remember who the third one is, but it's it's not the ones you're really hoping for.
Exactly. Right, because we had one who just passed away recently, unfortunately, Chad McQueen. But
Mm.
he was another one that like, you'd see McQueen on the cover and it's like, okay, Cynthia Rothrock's doing a better job here, but I get it. You gotta, you're in the video store, you see McQueen there, and you think, okay, that's gonna work for me.
Yeah, because I was, before we were, I was doing a little bit of prep for this. I was sort of thinking about, okay, who are in the realm of DTV, like who are like the Nepo babies of DTV, and obviously we've got Scott Eastwood, who we're talking about, but there's people like Chad McQueen, who you've mentioned, Mike Norris, you got like Patrick Schwarzenegger, James Caan, Cole Hauser as well.
Cool.
Chris Penn, obviously Sean's brother, but obviously son of Leo Penn. Chris Mitchum, David Carradine, who we've already mentioned, and even like somebody like Michael Madsen. You could his mother worked in the film industry, not on screen, but she did work in the industry. So even he's sort of a, you can make the case of him being a bit of an Nepo baby.
Yeah, because it's really interesting how much it can help. Like, just a kind of what we think of as an innocuous example would be Star Trek Six, where Christian Slater gets this cameo appearance where he's essentially telling Sulu that something's wrong, and he gets that part because his mom is a casting director, and she was casting for that film, and Leonard Nimoy had told Whoopi Goldberg, we don't want you in this movie because you're too big of a star and we think you're too big to be to a cameo. And then his Slater's mom goes behind Nimoy and gets him this small part, despite the fact that Nimoy didn't want any of that stuff going on. And so, it's like you wouldn't even think about somebody like that, like a casting director, playing that kind of a part.
I know, just it's completely insidious. There's even, I mean, when we'll get into it. I'm going to keep my
Yeah.
my powder dry a little bit on
Yeah.
this, but there was. I was looking at it. There's even more nepotism involved in these films than I initially thought, Matt.
Yeah, yeah, it's absolutely, and again, it's one of those things when we get to the second film, 211, which has Nicolas Cage's son, Weston. Of course, Nicolas Cage is actually Nicolas Coppola, and so in his case, he used a different last name to get into the biz, as opposed to his Francis Ford Coppola's daughter. I kind of we're
Mm.
going to be talking. 211 also takes place in Massachusetts, so my Mass accent came out there for a second, but but Sophia Coppola, she used her dad's name, whereas Nicolas Cage went with Cage instead of Coppola. But like you said, I mean, is he getting, maybe
Everyone in the industry is going to know
right.
he's the whose son he is. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's kind of quite a sort of cosmetic, I think, for me, distinction that those actors are drawing if they do take, use a name that isn't the one they're born with.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and just to it was definitely Deathbring, like you were talking about, that had those names, had Norris, Drago, McQueen. And what's great is it's got Billy Drago, so it's like Norris, Swayze, Drago, McQueen. As if I mean, I don't think Drago had it. I feel like if anybody came up by themselves in the biz, it feels like Billy Drago. But maybe we'll look into it and find out that he had a dad was a screenwriter or something like that.
Well, I mean, he's somebody that I don't feel like we should be losing from the film industry. I mean, we should be using, cloning or, genetic technology to kind of create a new, Drago that can, provide that sort of second henchman vibe in, a big budget film, or can be the leading villain in a DTV effort.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think one of the things about these movies we'll be talking about here is that I think any of them could have used a Drago as a baddie. He was your instant baddie in a can kind of thing, where you just sort of like, here's Billy Drago, and he was this greasy, slimy presence that you just knew was going to be bad. And yeah, it's one of those things that like it, we miss that. I think especially if he was like maybe teamed up with like a Matthias Hughes or somebody like that. Like you just knew it was just evil from the top, and you just wanted your hero to roundhouse kick them into oblivion.
Well, I think you're sort of touching on something which is a minor bugbear of mine, which is I feel like I've got no scientific empirical evidence to back this up. It's just my impression of watching a lot of films, but there does seem to me to be a sort of blandification of like actors in films. Like they're all, they're just sort of all some varying degree of like, normal to slash good looking, and people who have an unusual appearance seem to be a bit of a diminishing um, diminishing quality within films, and I think it makes them a poorer place.
Yeah, yeah, I agree completely. I mean, I think, we can maybe make the case for this movie we're going to be talking about here with the actor who plays the baddie in this film, and Kevin Durand. You can maybe make a case for him kind of having some of those qualities, but like you said, he's also still like really like good, like he could be a good guy in one of these movies too, and you wouldn't really bat an eye at it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But well, yeah, well, maybe we'll get kind of stuck in then on this dangerous movie here. So this was one of the two we picked because it stars Scott Eastwood. It's interesting. He plays a character named D, even though he's Dylan. I don't know why they decided to truncate Dylan to D. That second syllable, I guess, was too much.
Yeah, clearly didn't want to burden his fellow castmates with having to say a two-syllable name.
Right, exactly. And so this character, he seems to have some sort of social developmental issues, but also we find out that he's on parole because he's getting out of prison for whatever it was that he did in prison. We don't know yet. And then he gets a note that his brother died, and then also some random guy attacks him in the bath in his apartment, and he sort of he's also being hunted by Famke Janssen, who's an FBI agent. And then he runs off to some island in the South Pacific where his brother was living, this bed and breakfast that he was opening. And these baddies lay siege to the place, led by Kevin Durand, and they're on the search for something that Scott Eastwood's brother had. At the same time, because he's estranged from his family, his mother is there at the brother's funeral, and she's not happy with him, and she's sort of kicking him out, despite the fact that it seems like Scott Eastwood is the only one who's capable of taking care of these baddies. She feels the need to kick him out, and so yeah, and then we have this other role of Mel Gibson playing. A therapist who, Scott Eastwood kind of calls almost like bits of comic relief, where he's calling Mel Gibson to kind of get advice on how he should be handling situations because he's trying to turn a new leaf. His Mel Gibson's son from another mother. Tyrese Gibson also plays a part in this, but very small part. And so, but eventually we kind of figured out that what's being kept there is like some gold, which is, I guess, it's an old myth, the Yamashita gold. I guess that's something that's been around a long time. So they've kind of took an old myth and put it into this film here, and now it's just sort of up to Scott Eastwood as D to take care of these baddies and save his family. So, yeah, Will, what did you think of Dangerous?
I have to say, Matt, I wasn't a huge fan of this film. It's going back to what you were talking about at the beginning. It does feel a little bit paint by numbers, and there are some attempts to do something a little bit to add some interesting elements into that kind of classic sort of siege movie that we get for sort of a large chunk of this movie, and then turns out not to be. Nazi gold is a classic sort of MacGuffin of many films. Here, though, it's Japanese gold, so a little bit of a wrinkle, there. But unfortunately, I didn't feel like a lot of it worked. I didn't feel that they really leaned into this idea of Scott Eastwood being this like damaged vet who is desperately trying to kind of control his psychopathic violent urges, and I feel like they should have leaned more into that, specifically as a bit of a as a comedy idea. I didn't really feel that they kind of made as much of those moments as they should, where like Eastwood is calling Gibson for some advice in the midst of some sort of gun battle or fist fight, or in the wake of one of them. And I did think there were some other issues as well. I did feel like Kevin Durand aside, like a lot of the cast members in this film were incredibly bland. Unfortunately, I also think Scott Eastwood is he's an immediately forgettable presence. I mean, I looked up his CV, and I've seen quite a lot of the films that he's been in, but I've no memory of him being in those films. And so he's quite a vanilla, quite a bland leading man, and I found Dangerous quite a bland and vanilla film.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I think to your point about the social developmental disorders that his character has, they're so uneven, right? It's like on the one hand, he has to use cue cards to say, his condolences to his mother when he goes down to see his brother lying in
Hmm.
state. So he has these cue cards. It's like, oh, I'm sorry for your loss. Is there anything I can do? And he's pulling these cue cards. Yet he is like charismatic, and I guess I don't know. He's able to joke with characters. Like for example, the character of Joe, he's joking with her. He's actually
Yeah.
and somebody with those kind of social developmental disorders would not be able to make jokes like that. They would either be rattling off facts that make no sense, or they would just be like stating things matter of factly or whatever. And so it seemed like it was one of those things where it was like, when we need him to have this developmental disorder, we're going to use it. And
Yeah.
then when we need him to be charismatic and funny, we're going to do that instead. And it was almost always at the convenience of the plot.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I sort of wonder if they couldn't have just sort of simplified it and just had him sort of somebody who's kind of, I don't know, who's easily triggered to violence, and so throughout the kind of escalating situation where he's trapped on this island with these villains pursuing them, he's just kind of he's just fighting this urge to resort to his sort of those like elemental parts of his character where he's really fighting the desire to just turn to ultra violence to solve the problems, and then that would allow you to have those these phone calls with Mel Gibson where he's like, oh, I realize I'm hulkifying, I need to speak to Mel again. And he can then do, when you want to have him deliver some comedic one-liners, he can do that because it's not inconsistent with his character. He's just somebody who's trying to fight his violent urges.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the one moment where we really get something like that is when he has one of the baddies tied up in the basement, and he's interrogating him, and he's got a knife that he's going to use to sort of get information, and he says something along the lines of, in the past I would have just cut your eyes out and fed them to you or something like that. And then he goes with the knife and he goes towards his eye and it cuts away, and we wonder, did he cut the guy's eyes out or not? And we find out later that he didn't cut his eyes out. And I think that's like a kind of a moment where like they could have done more of that kind of thing where it's like he's on the verge of being this person,
Yeah.
but then he pulls it back.
Yeah,
So
he does his breathing exercises, and he kind of doesn't gouge the man's eyes out, or says
yeah.
his mantra.
Or even what would have been funny is he's got this guy tied up and he's like calling Mel Gibson and talking through stuff while this guy is sitting there tied up. Like, what do I, like what is going on here? Like, I mean, that could have been a funny element as well. It was more, I mean, they use one element of that, right? Where they're under fire with this other character, played by Brendan Fletcher, who's like an archaeology professor or something, and they're under fire. And this guy Fletcher, he's kind of that again, going by the paint by numbers. He's the obnoxious, annoying character that why we need these in these movies, why we need to be annoyed, I don't know. But he's like yelling at Eastwood, like, why are you doing a phone call when we're under, then Eastwood's like talking to Mel Gibson, and Mel Gibson's like drunk and like waking up in the middle of the night drunk, like picking up the phone. So they didn't have enough of that. I think that's the problem.
Yeah, I totally agree. As I was saying earlier, I felt they needed to lean a bit more. They needed to rejig this part of this aspect of the film, and then lean into it a bit more for kind of like some sort of comedy moments at those particular moments. So yeah, it's kind of felt like a bit half-hearted, and I don't think. I mean, I think it's not there in the script, but also I don't think, Scott Eastwood, God bless him. I don't think he's the most gifted actor, and I think somebody else could have done even with what's on the page of the script here. I think another actor could have done a bit more to just make that a bit more of an interesting character.
Yeah, I mean, you think of someone like a Scott Adkins who, he's not, he's always trying as an actor, right? Like he's always like, I think he would have taken a role like this and like really said like, oh, what can I do with this that's different, and again, it may not have come out as good as what we got here from Scott Eastwood, but I think he would have thought through the part a lot more and said like, okay, he may have even pushed back on the director, like, I don't think I should be making this joke here. I don't think that's the, and maybe that he and the director would have butted heads and maybe it wouldn't have worked out. But but he also would have had the chops from an action standpoint to do the other sequences.
Yeah, definitely, and I think Scott Eastwood was a producer on this film, so I think if he wanted to breathe a little bit of more life into some of the scenes in these films, I think he would have had the sway to do it. And it's not like David Hackle, who's the director of this film. It's not like he's some auteur who's been trying to bring this film to screen for the last 25 years. Right. I think if Scott Eastwood says, "Hey, like I've got an idea," I'm sure it could have got listened to.
Exactly. Though I do think this movie did get held up in development hell because they ran out of money, and I think they had to go to Canada for some tax credit kind of things. And I don't know if Kevin Durant, who's originally from Thunder Bay, Ontario, if he helped out with that. Maybe he knew some guys who could get him some money. But yeah. So there was that piece of. But yeah, I think. I think from Scott Eastwood's part, he probably liked doing the more comedic things without really thinking about the fact that, like, is this that character, right? Is that, because, you're right. To your point, I think he's really trying. Like when he's doing that scene in the mirror where he's acting out how he's going to console his mom, he's really trying to get into that part. It's just it's not him. That's not who he is as a person. He's going to that Nepo baby thing. I'm born in 1986 to a dad who was so well established in Hollywood that he probably grew up with the best of everything, and so there is no place for him to be awkward or like he kind of knew going into any room that, oh, you're Clint Eastwood's son, probably from the
Mm.
youngest age, that the idea of being awkward for him probably just doesn't even register.
It probably doesn't, and he really is awkward in some scenes. I mean, there was one that really stood out for me where I think there's a scene that takes place in the house where he's talking to the kind of the people who live there about what the villains are there for, and it's just I just found his Scott's delivery of the dialogue was just really like painful, and I was like, I don't know how you could be, if you're the director, I don't know how you can sort of like, yep, that's the take we want.
Exactly. Well, because you think about him in the Fast and Furious movie, which he did with Tyrese Gibson. I guess he did a couple of those Fast and Furious movies, but the role that he has in those are limited, and it's really just lines here or there. Also, he's kind of the one that I would say maybe he's taking his lumps in that film because he's not the hero. He's not the great one. He's the one who Paul Walker's going to maybe deck or something like that. Like he's the one. He's not the guy that everybody loves. He's kind of more the pissant character, and I think that's kind of a good role for someone who's learning the business or something like that, to take a role like that. Whereas when you're Clint Eastwood's son, yeah, you're more likely to get this role as like the hero of the film or something like that, and it's not really him yet.
Yeah, I mean, I do not remember him in those Fast and Furious movies at all, which, I mean, that's yeah. And I can't remember what other I say I looked at his IMDb page and I was like, oh yep, I've seen that. Was he really in that? I don't remember. Was he? I don't remember that. He is just sort of incredibly bland presence. But I mean, one thing I wanted to discuss with you, like, was the turn for the Japanese gold, where we kind of like, this is the sort of the big reveal as we kind of like understand what is going on with this movie, what is motivating, what is this, what was the secret his Scott Eastwood's brother was investigating, what are these group of private contractors, rogue private contractors, what are they after? And like I felt like we I mean, maybe should be careful what I wish for, but I felt we needed like much more explanation. And this is a massive spoiler here, but I think we've already agreed we're not worrying about spoilers. But like, how can there be a massive submarine pen on this island with a Japanese submarine loaded with gold in it and no one know about it? Like, I mean, that was clearly American military clearly American military infrastructure. Did the American Navy just forget about it? Did they just forget that they had a Japanese submarine locked in there? I mean, like, how,
Right.
how they, that really needed some major explanation, and we didn't even get a cursory attempt to try and justify why the hell it was there.
No, and it was again, it was one of those areas where they were trying to not be paint by numbers. So they're like, everybody's done the gold buried in, I mean, even David Sedaris did gold buried in an island or something like that. So everybody's done that. All right, let's not do that. Let's try to kind of find a cute way to do it. And I imagine from a budgetary standpoint too, that would have been a lot more expensive than just having bricks of bars
Mm,
buried under the ground. But it, like you said, it stretches all credulity to have this submarine underneath this bed and breakfast that was one time a Navy base. It just, yeah, and again, it's one of these things where some of these movies where it's like, a secret chamber can lead to it's almost like that movie Space Mutiny where they have a huge
mm.
boiler room on a spaceship. It's like this secret chamber behind a wine cellar or wine rack leads to this massive world of like Fraggle Rock or something like that, where all this stuff is happening. It's just again, it's absurd. Like, how would you not know that what you were on was built
Yeah.
over top of all this stuff?
I completely agree. And as I said, how did the American military forget that
Yeah.
they had this base here and there was a a Japanese captured Japanese sub in there with a load of gold on it. I mean, how does that happen? I mean, it's so bizarre, that plot line, that plot point. It's so bizarre, and it's so I was going to say poorly explained. Well, it's just not explained at all. It made me wonder if this was one of those sort of like Roger Corman type deals where, like, they somehow, because that set looked much better and bigger than you would expect in a film of this sort, and it made me wonder if, like, that set and was all from another film, and they were like, yeah, they paid whoever built it like a bit of money so they could film on it for 5 days, and so they had a film with a completely different plot, and they're just like, okay, yeah, but we can have this really expensive set from this other film, and so they just kind of crowbarred it into the film in order to, as a cheap way of bolstering the production value of the film. So it's so poorly explained. It made me wonder if there was a something like that going on behind the scenes.
I wonder, and I wonder too, because this was an actual location that they were filming um uh in the Pacific Northwest, where property is extremely expensive, and it's possible that maybe they couldn't dig. Though I guess I feel like you could find a way to dig. You could find a way to make it look like you're digging. So yeah, but you might be right that they maybe just saw this really great set and were like, let's find a way to put this in the movie because it looks better than just a bunch of guys with pickaxes and shovels out it
Digging a
that.
hole in, yeah.
Right. We've all seen that scene before. Let's do this instead. And of course, there's also like this massive like howitzer gun that Scott Eastwood starts using to shoot the baddies with, which is a little bit. I mean, that was almost like a shark jumping moment where you're just like, this is just beyond. This movie's kind of
Yeah.
gotten out of control. It's lost its identity. It doesn't really know what identity it wants to have at this point when that scene's in the movie.
Yeah, because miraculously, after 80 years of not being used, this gun is in perfect working order.
Yeah. Unless his brother Sean was down there oiling the gun every, right, cleaning and oiling the gun every few weeks to keep it in good shape. Yeah. Now, I wanted to ask you because there was one scene that really struck me as, growing up, in the 80s and 90s and watching, especially in the 90s, watching movies in the 90s. We get this scene in the very beginning of the film where Scott Eastwood, he's on the lam now. We don't know where he is. And so Famke Jensen, as the FBI agent, her one clue to where he might be is on a bottle of pills that he leaves behind. And it has the doctor's name. The doctor is Mel Gibson. So she goes to confront Mel Gibson. And I don't know if they're even in the same if they're shooting these scenes at the same time, because I don't think they're ever. Maybe there's a couple times like she hands him her card and they're in the scene
Mm.
together. But I felt like this is the kind of scene that in the 90s, Clint Eastwood might have been directing a movie that the two of them were in. And, in a different time, a different place where this sequence would have been much better acted. The script would have been much better. I mean, it would have been a big screen sequence here, and it's one of those things about these movies where these big screen actors are now doing direct to video. I mean, Famke Janssen's case, I think, is she's in her 60s now. She's just turned 60. I guess she maybe has aged out of those nice roles. And Mel Gibson, we know who Mel Gibson is, right? We know why Mel Gibson is there in this cardigan sweater and tie. We know why he's there. But it was a fascinating thing to be watching them kind of do this drivel back and forth. That they're kind of sleepwalking their way through. Though to be fair to Mel Gibson, as bad as he is, when he sleepwalks through a scene, he's still fun to watch. It's a real fascinating thing with it. But Famke Janssen, unfortunately, I don't want to make fun of people's appearances, but she's got a lot of filler in her cheeks. And so to know that this is where we're at 30 years later for these two, it was a very fascinating thing. I don't know how you felt about that.
Yeah, it was. I mean, Famke Janssen plays possibly the most useless FBI agent ever. I mean, you could completely eliminate her character from the film, and it would make absolutely no difference. So you're supposedly hunting Scott Eastwood, but it makes no difference really to the outcome of the film. I mean, she eventually turns up at the island at the end of the film just in time to get shot, and That's it. I mean,
Right.
I mean, it's completely pointless. I mean, you did mention you mentioned Mel Gibson's knitwear. I mean, he had some very impressive cardigan action going on
Yes.
in this film. If I was him, I'd be, saying like, I'm going to be taking this home with me. I think
Right.
this is not going back to wardrobe.
Yeah.
And actually, Scott Eastwood got in on the knitwear action as well. I mean, I don't know. I should have checked the credits of this movie. Perhaps there's, with thanks to Acme Knitwear at the, in the involved in the production here, they contributed some of their finest lines in kind of men's knitwear here. But yeah, it was. You got two good actors here, like Mel Gibson and Famke Janssen, and they're in a scene together. You want somebody involved in this film to say, okay, let's make this a moment, because it's probably the only moment in this film where you've got two actors with actual talent sharing a
Right.
scene with each other. And yeah, as you say, all we get is them exchanging some drivel.
Yeah. Now, I also kind of pointed out because you mentioned about these great outfits here. I decided I hadn't thought to look this up myself beforehand, but the costume designer for this film is Maxine Baker, and this is the first line of her IMDb bio. Maxine Baker is a cinematic storyteller. Those are all that started with caps. So cinematic storyteller each have caps to start them off. Maxine Baker is a cinematic storyteller who expresses herself in fiber, cloth, and haberdashery. Now, I'm not going to have you guess what her top four movies are, but the first one is Jason X. Second one is Friday the 13th, the series. Third one is a movie called The Last Victim, which I've never heard of. Another one's called We Summon Darkness, which I've never heard of. But yeah, Jason X and Friday the 13th. So maybe, right, because Jason's sweater, right, that's a big part of
Mm,
those movies. That's where the sweater piece comes in. She's maybe best. And she does Christmas movies. She does one of her more recent ones is a movie from
they're all
2021
about
called Fixing Up
sweaters.
Christmas. Yeah, I wonder if that's what she does. If you need a sweater on the cheap, because I mean she's doing these are all direct to video. I mean, I see a bigger movie. I see like Harvard Man, which was I think a little bit bigger. It was still kind of direct to video though. I mean, pretty much everything she did was direct to video. So she hasn't done any big screen
Mm.
movies. But yeah, if you need a sweater, it sounds like she's the one you call.
Yeah, I mean, if you
Yeah.
need to express some key part of your main character's personality through the medium of wool, like, she's the lady to call.
Yes. Now she also mentioned haberdashery, and the only hat I can think of in this movie is Scott Eastwood's like skull, knit beanie. I don't know that there was. I mean, I feel like we had a missed opportunity there for haberdashery. Like everybody should have been sitting around at the funeral thing with these. Like the mom could have this big grand, Kentucky Derby hat on or something like that.
Is haberdashery? I think there's a wider definition of the word haberdashery, because
Oh,
if I
maybe.
go into a supermarket, they'll have like the haberdashery, which will be sort of needles, threads. I don't know, might be some boot polish there. So I think it might have a wider definition, but
Ah, yeah, like it's actually men's clothing. It's more, yeah, I never
right.
thought of that. Yeah, it's a store that sells men's clothing and accessories. Yeah, so in her case, so that's maybe where the sweaters come in. Yeah, that she's uh you know she knows how
so
to
so
dress a
fond
guy.
of yeah so fond of using within this particular film. But yeah, I think there was talking of haberdashery, men's accessories, I did notice a particularly egregious piece of continuity which was exposed through the medium of haberdashery, where Scott Eastwood starts climbing down a ladder, but suddenly by the bottom of the ladder, he's suddenly got a woolly hat on, which
Right,
he definitely
yes.
wasn't wearing at the top of the ladder. So
Okay, I'm
yeah.
glad you caught that because I thought not that I was losing my mind, but I thought I missed something completely because I was like, I swore he left the house without that beanie on. I swore he was walking around without that beanie on, and then he suddenly had it. So yeah, that might, I guess, get to that point of the film being shot at different times, I guess, because I mean, one of the other pieces I was
Temperatures dropped 10 degrees. So
exactly over
he's like,
10 years.
I can't complete this sequence without a howl now. I'm sorry.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, one of the things I'm wondering about is with Tyrese Gibson because, you know, spoiler alert here, we get the paint by numbers sequence where he's shot and he falls in the water, and normally that character comes back, right? Like Tyrese Gibson would have been doing the part that Famke Johnson did, right, where he shows up and I don't know where at the end and shoots the baddie, and it's like, oh, he was still alive. He was alive the whole time, and he was hiding under the water, holding his breath the whole time. I don't know exactly, but that's usually how that works. But he doesn't come back at all. That's it. When he gets shot and he falls in the water, we never see him again.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of. I think it would have been very easy to just have him sort of seemingly float away dead, but then he sort of washes up on a beach, and we see him slowly stir, and we realize he's not dead, and he then sort of like, oh God, I'm goddamn pissed now, and he sort of wanders back in just in time for the finale, where he can save Scott Eastwood at a crucial moment and get his revenge on the villain that blasted him at one particular point. So yeah, they didn't go down that route, but instead they just decided to have Famke Janssen wander in at the end and get shot instead. So
Yeah.
pays your
So,
money, pays your money, takes your choice.
because one of the things I read in here, which I don't think this doesn't make sense to me, is it says filming shut down for lack of funding, according to February of 2015 reports, which that doesn't sound right because this movie doesn't look like it was shot in 2015. It definitely looks like a more modern movie. But it did say that it was filmed, I guess it was filmed in the winter in British Columbia, I guess, in an area near the border. But I do wonder if you know, the date might have been wrong on when they had to stop filming, but I wonder if that interruption in filming while they were trying to get money from from the Canadian government, if maybe that meant like, okay, well, Tyrese, we can't get him anymore because he's on to his next Fast and Furious movie. So maybe we bring in Famke Johnson and have her, it's like, I wonder what kind of machinations there were for this.
Yeah, and sometimes it's very hard to sort of like equally you don't know how, maybe it's shut down, but you don't know how long it's shut down for, and that maybe the gap between that 2015 date and 2019 is because the film just, it was completed maybe 2 years earlier, but it just sort of sat on a shelf for whatever reason, and before kind of emerging in 2019. So I mean, sometimes these, filming and release dates, there can be all sorts of stories behind it as to, yeah, and surprising in terms of like when things actually got completed, and when things actually came out to public view.
Yeah, and I can't think of a movie that had that situation that was better for it, right? Like that never seems to help.
No, I don't. Yeah, films are. It's usually the sign of something going badly wrong. Although going back to Coppola, Apocalypse Now, didn't that took about 3 years to film and make, and that was a pretty
Right.
decent effort.
It did. Yeah. And the funniest thing about that, right, is that, when you read the actual Heart of Darkness, Kurtz is like this frail, like skinny thing. And, Brando shows up on set and he's like way overweight. And they're just like, let's just go with it. And I think, did he was nominated for an Oscar for that part, right? I don't think he won it, but I think he was, or maybe he did win. I don't know. I think he was nominated for it. And it's like, yeah, Coppola's like, yeah, we're just going to go with it. And I do wonder, like, if they were like, oh, we got to let you lose some weight, probably wouldn't have been the same movie.
I think you'd be having sort of being aware of the last sort of 20-25 years of Marlon Brando's life. I mean, good luck waiting for him to lose
Right.
weight.
Yeah, it wasn't going to happen. Exactly. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I was trying to think if there was anything else in this movie that I wanted to cover in here. I mean, the other thing is the Kevin Durand character, who I think he's a fun baddie, I think, for this kind of movie. But like you said, with the Billy Drago kind of thing, it also is like he's kind of trying to ham it up as the baddie, but there doesn't seem to be like a lot of room for that. And he's not naturally a Billy Drago that he needs more room. I think these kind of baddies need more room to be that kind of baddie.
Yeah, and I feel like Kevin Durant really needed a bit more to work with, because I think he's pretty good in this, but I feel like he could have been better, and I feel like the only reason he's not better is because he's not got anything to really cut loose with. I mean, I was thinking about him as the villain in this film. I mean, he's essentially little more than a haircut and a waistcoat, but but I could see, despite kind of criticizing his performance in that way, you could see he had more to give, but nobody, unfortunately, seemed interested in getting it out of him.
Right. And I mean, he had like three different accents too in the movie. He had like this like New York accents for times. He had this Newfoundland like New Brunswick accent that is I don't know if you've ever heard that accent before. It almost sounds Irish. It's really unique. And so he had that accent in some points. I don't know if maybe he's originally from Thunder Bay, Ontario, but he's of French Canadian descent. So I guess maybe his parents spoke French growing up. So maybe he's just all kinds of different accents, or maybe just being as a Canadian, he's just used to doing different accents, and he thought, I'll try them all out on here, and I can put them all on my IMDb reel.
Well, and maybe it's just whenever they kept picking up filming, maybe you just couldn't quite remember what accent was I doing in this.
Yeah,
I'm going to go with New Brunswick
exactly.
until someone tells me to do different.
Exactly. And that character of Joe, played by Destiny Millen, she's the only one, when you go through the IMDb page for this, she's the only one who doesn't have a headshot on IMDb, which is usually it's a bad sign if an actor doesn't have a headshot on there. But she had that potential to be sort of an offbeat version of, when we get into the next movie, 211, kind of more of a one note female character that we get a lot of times in these movies. I would say, like, for example, Leanne Lapp, who plays the widow of Scott Eastwood's brother, she's more of that one note, right? Like, I'm here to protect my
Oh
kid.
yeah.
I trust Eastwood. I'm kind of not so sure about my mother-in-law. I don't know what her deal is. She's more that one note, whereas Joe kind of seemed like there could have been kind of more of an interplay with like the two of them sort of going out and doing this stuff, and it was like kind of these things that just weren't explored. And I don't know if maybe because as an actor, she's not as big, and so they didn't want to give her as much of the film to do. But I feel like the two of them, her and Eastwood, could have had more of like, almost like, I don't want to say a buddy cop kind of movie, but that kind of interplay between the two of them could have worked much better.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think, I, maybe I'm wrong here. But I reckon Eastwood would probably work better if he had somebody to kind of bounce off a little bit. Um, but maybe if I saw it, I would like, oh no, this is painful. But what he was doing here on his own, like, wasn't great. And yeah, having that, because there's some kind of, yeah, those bits where she's in the film are definitely, she brings a bit of vim, a bit of life to those particular scenes. So yeah, she if she was in this film a bit more and integrated more into the action, I think that definitely would have improved it.
Yeah, it's a classic. I don't know if trope is the right word, but construct where you have a lead character who really doesn't have a lot of personality, but that's part of the deal, right? That whatever for whatever reason, and then you have this sort of. I mean, think of like Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker in the Rush Hour movies, right? Where Chris Tucker's doing all the heavy lifting in terms of like the joking and all
Mm.
that kind of stuff, and Jackie Chan. I mean, he jokes with him. He's got charisma himself, but he's also doing, he's sort of a little bit more serious in some parts, or he's the one who's doing all the action stuff. I think that could have been a good interplay here. They could have allowed them to have Scott Eastwood's character have less charisma, maybe, or he's joking around with her, or maybe that joking side comes out through her, possibly too. You never know.
Yeah, I mean, the one I always think about that side of things is the Charles Bronson film Murphy's Law, where you've got
Yes.
he's stuck together with Catherine Wilhoit as this mouthy, I can't remember which, some sort of criminal, petty criminal,
Right.
but she's bringing. I mean, Charles Bronson. I mean, he's about as expressive as Mount Rushmore, but so Kathleen Wilhot's she's the one that's bringing the pep in that
Yeah.
film.
Yeah, that's actually a really great point, because I think, I mean, this actress or actor, Destiny Millen, she's no Catherine Wilhoit. I mean, she was another level. I mean, we talked about her on the Roadhouse episode, where she is, bringing stuff to that movie that nobody in the new movie was really doing. And like you said, for Murphy's Law, she's fantastic in that as well. But it could have been a similar idea, and I think it's one of the things with these modern DTV movies, maybe because there just aren't a lot of Catherine Wilhoits out there to make these kinds of movies. But a lot of times the female co-star character is a bit of a one note for that reason. Like they just want, a woman who's like between 5'7" and 5'10", thin as a rail, long hair, and looks good in tight jeans. Like that's what they're
Mm.
they're going for. Maybe with a flannel shirt over top to show that she's, a little bit more down to earth, despite the fact that her jeans were painted on. That's what they go for in these movies all the time, and there really isn't that sort of that character in there that like a Will Hoyt brought to Murphy's Law, but that made that movie so much better. And so I think this was a missed opportunity in this film, but I think overall I think these movies they could do well to kind of find more Catherine Wilhoits out there. I'm sure it's not like a thing where Catherine Wilhoit is the only actor, female actor who could just do that kind of role, right? There's more out there. They said to not be afraid to do it, and I think Destiny Millens as Joe here was one opportunity they kind of missed.
I completely agree. There are more actors than there are jobs to fill. So, like, you can't tell me you can't find somebody who is like, you're not going to get Kathleen Wilhoit, this low budget film or whatever. You go out and find the new one. You kind of put the effort into finding somebody who can actually, bring that element to the screen. So yeah, they could have definitely a missed opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah. I was trying to think. Is there anything else on this film that you wanted to discuss? I don't know if there's anything that we missed.
No, we talked about knitwear. We talked about the ridiculous appearance of the Japanese sub in this film. So yeah, I think I'm all good on Dangerous.
Yeah, I think the last thing I would mention, this movie is an hour and 39 minutes, which it's touching on that 100-minute mark, but it feels longer than that.
Oh
There
yeah.
are Yeah, I think there were a lot of points. I mean, I get the hour mark when we've got 39 minutes left. It felt like a natural conclusion point. And so there's a lot of places where this movie could have ended, and they just kind of keep padding things out. So that never helps a movie like this either.
It really doesn't, and it really takes more time than it should to kind of get going. There was no reason for this film to be kind of 109 minutes.
No, I mean, I think of the two Andy Sidaris movies that dealt with gold, right? There was Savage Beach and then Return to Savage Beach. I guess there was also Enemy Gold. That was another one that had. So Sidaris liked the buried gold idea. He used that one a lot, but he seemed to be able to get in and out in 90 minutes and do it with plenty of dressing and undressing sequences padded into the film. So if Sidaris can do it that quickly, I think anybody else, they should be able to do it.
Yeah, I completely agree. Completely agree. I mean, it's like 30 minutes before the main sort of inciting incident happens, and that's just like there is no reason why there needs to be as much setup as that in this film.
Yeah, exactly. So I think overall both of us are kind of like, yeah, no on that. And also I think from a nepotism standpoint, yeah, Scott Eastwood is there because he's Scott Eastwood. That they're really there's nothing about like he doesn't bring anything to this role other than the fact that he shares a name and likeness to his father.
Yeah, I'm just looking up Scott Eastwood now. Is he a parent yet? Is there?
He might be. He was
Oh,
born in '86, they said. So he'd be what 38 now.
okay.
He-
I can
Actually,
find
no,
no.
not yet. I
Can
don't. It
find
doesn't look
no
like it.
mention. I can find no mention yet of him being a parent. So let's keep our
One thing
fingers
that's
let's fingers crossed that there's not going to be another generation.
right. Well, and another thing actually we should point out because you were talking about you know how some of these nepo babies use a different last name. So he used his mother's maiden name for his early films, but look at some of the movies that he was doing. Flags of Our Fathers. Who directed that? Gran Torino. I don't know who directed that one. Invictus. He did use his last name, but again, I'm not sure who the director was for that movie. So
Yeah,
yeah,
we'll have to look it up after we finish this show.
exactly. Yeah, it's interesting that he was doing these movies that they sound familiar. I guess because he was born in '86, he wouldn't have been able to do Unforgiven. So that's he was too young for that
Yeah,
one.
couldn't get him into Heartbreak Ridge.
Right, exactly, exactly. Right. Yeah. Well. I guess we'll move on to our next nepo baby. And this nepo baby is Weston Cage, who's actually acting with his father, Nicolas Cage, in the film we're going to talk about here, 211. This is an interesting one. I guess before we get in on Weston Cage, because we've never talked about Nicolas Cage. I don't think. I think you've been on to talk about him. I mean, what are your thoughts on Nicolas Cage as an actor?
I have to say, like, I don't really have particularly strong opinions on him. I mean, I know, you know, he certainly has a very devoted fan base who are into his, you know, moments of cage rage. But I don't particularly have strong views on him. He's not in any films that I particularly love. You know, I've got some friends who love Con Air, and so obviously, you know, Nicolas Cage is very dear to them, and you know, people who are like really big into, I don't know, like Face Off or whatever. But yeah, he's somebody who so yeah, I'm not particularly I find it hard to have a particular sort of strong opinion on him, but he is as somebody who is interested in the world of DTV, I am sort of interested, obviously, in how his career has gone in latter years, obviously with his various financial issues steering him into a incredibly prolific career in DTV. So yeah, and I've immensely enjoyed reading the stories about how he has, you know, spunked away his fortune on buying incredibly rare Superman comics and, you know, whatever other bizarre collectibles that he happened to waste millions of pounds on.
Well, exactly, because one of the things I was reading was that he has gotten himself financially solvent again by doing all these movies, so he doesn't need to do them again. But when I look at his IMDb bio, I see 7 upcoming projects here. It looks like he's still working quite a bit, but maybe they aren't. You know, he's a little choosier now. But for me, I've always loved Leaving Las Vegas. That's one of my favorite movies of the '90s. So it's in my top 10 of the '90s. And so that movie, and of course, that's when he wins the Oscar for. That was just, I've always loved that part from him. And then, like you were mentioning, those actions, he does that kind of that trilogy or that trio of The Rock, Con Air, Face Off. I like those, but they aren't kind of, ones that I absolutely love. But it's amazing how he does Bring Out the Dead, which is another one I like, a Scorsese film, which is kind of a lesser known Scorsese movie, but I like that one. But then he just starts doing these insipid, romantic movies, these family films, these bad actioners. And I remember in the late 2000s, there was a conversation on Ebert and Roper, and I don't know if Ebert was still there at the time or if he was, out because with health issues, and it was Roper and whoever the guest was. But they were talking about the fact that when you get into the late 2000s, his movies weren't being screened for critics, and they were saying they'd never seen anything like that before. That a huge star of Cage's caliber, it's one thing to have like white chicks, not be screened for critics, or like Billy Madison or something like that. Like they understood that, but for somebody of Cage's caliber to have movies coming out that weren't being screened, it was a complete shock for them. It didn't make any sense. And it's when that turn comes for him, it's like the bottom falls out quickly. And I think he just always thought that the money was going to be there. And so then he just, yeah, I mean, once the 2010s come, he just goes full bore into that DTV world. So he's always a fascinating character. I mean, like his 80s and 90s stuff, I've always loved it. And so, and Pig is a recent one that we covered on the
Mm,
podcast that I really enjoyed. But I
I
mean, it
like
could
that
be,
as well.
yeah, it could be an interesting future episode for us to maybe do a couple of these Cage DTVers that like the one we're talking about here, because he's a very different one from Gibson, right? Mel Gibson is doing the movies he's doing because of who he is as a person, whereas Nicolas Cage is doing the movies he's doing because I guess he made some bad decisions in the 2000s, and they've come home to roost, and he needed to make money again.
Yeah, and it's I haven't really. An area I've dived into a little bit of the Nicolas Cage DTV era, but not terribly deep, not terribly deeply. So there's some sort of interesting ones. I guess it's it's about finding the the little pearls within that output. There was one that I did watch. It wasn't a terribly good movie, but I think it had a script by Paul Schrader. I think it's called like Dying of the Light or something like that. But I think Paul Schrader like disowned the film because I think I think his thing was they butchered the script or something. But yeah, so even within the sort of the seemingly dross, there's seems to be the little efforts by Cage to, because if you're a Cage stuck in the treadmill of these DTV movies, if you get the opportunity to, what you mean Paul Schrader wrote the script, okay, like I'll do that one over
Yeah.
these other six, nothing burgers.
Right, exactly. 'Cause I think that's an interesting thing, right, with him is that he, like we think of like some of the like this idea of the big name star doing direct to video. You think of like Bruce Willis, which we now know part of the reason why we thought he was mailing those movies in was because his health was declining, and so it wasn't even that he was mailing them in. It was more that he was almost like a Bela Lugosi thing, where Randall Emmett was propping him up to get through the films. Or you've got like Robert De Niro, who just has these sense of these movies, like I think Setup was one that he did. I don't know what one of those that he did with like 50 Cent, where there's a sense of like, hey, I've won my Oscars, I've done my greatest movies of all time. You don't need me to do anything in here. You know who I am. I'm going to give you what I'm going to give you. Um, and Cage is different because I think it's like there's moments where he's sort of, I don't want to say mailing it in, but he's just sort of going through the motions as an actor, like this sense of like the muscle memory is there so much that he's just going to do these scenes. But then he gives you these inspired pieces where you're just like, this is not what I expect from this kind of. I'm expecting Scott Eastwood from this movie, and I'm getting this Nicolas Cage performance.
Yeah, it's interesting as to sort of what when you see like an acting great drop down into this realm. It's always interesting to see how they respond to it. Like, are they phoning it in? Are they picking up a paycheck? Or are they actually trying to, give you something on the screen? And like sometimes, yeah, it's always interesting to try and like work out like what's motivating the actors. Like, is it professional pride? Like sometimes they do put in performance, and is that because it's professional pride, or is that because actually they like the material, or they think the director is somebody who's kind of is somebody's drawing this performance out of them, is kind of like pushing them, and they want to do some better work. Yeah, it's always interesting when you see them dropping down to this sort of level of filmmaking, to see how they how they respond and act in it. And I kind of it's one of those sort of remember the sort of the line by Christopher Lee to kind of surviving in films. It's he's got the famous line, and he was asked what's the trick of surviving a bad movie, and it's like, well, never to be bad in it.
Right.
And I think there's some wisdom there, because if you want to clamber out of this puddle of filmmaking, then you need to be you need to be sort of putting in performances that make other people think, yeah, you know what, I want that person in my film because I'll get something out of them, and reminding people that there is still an actor in there.
Well, yeah, because that's an interesting point, right? Because you think of someone like a De Niro. I mean, I wonder what the tipping point would be with De Niro, where like how many mailed in performances would he give before, I mean, we see it with Seagal, right? I always go back to this interview, and actually, I forget to mention, I think Ben Sachs actually was a producer on the previous movie that we talked about in Dangerous, either that or this one here, 211. I'll have to check. But Sean Malloy from I Must Break This podcast did this really great interview with Ben Sachs where he talked about with Steven Seagal, where Seagal just like kept coming to him saying, I need another couple million, let's do another movie. And there was that law of diminishing returns where it's like, how many times can Seagal trade on these four movies that he did in the late 80s, early 90s, and keep making these mailed in sit down role performances before people turn off and they don't want to keep watching them. And I think with De Niro, that's probably another one where it was like with Nicolas Cage. I think to your point, it's like almost like in his mind, he kind of wants to get back into those more prestige films. And so let me just, I'm not going to show you that I've lost it. If when
Mm.
movies like Pig come around, I'm still there. I've still got it. I'm going to give you these inspired moments in these films.
Yeah, because what was Mandy? Was it Mandy? That was another sort of
Yes.
Nicolas Cage film that was a bit of a obviously low budget, but where he gives a proper performance in a proper film, and got some critical attention off the back of it. So yeah, I think he seems to. I say I'm not. I haven't watched everything of his DTV oeuvre, not by a long shot, but he does seem to sort of realize, okay, I do need to periodically. It's very important that I remind people that I can still act.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting thing too. You talk about kind of the profession of being an actor, and one of the things that I always remember watching a documentary, like an hour kind of piece on Cary Grant, where he comes up in this period. He was born in like the turn of the century. He comes up in this world where there isn't this concept of method acting. It's that acting is a job, and you take the roles that are going to pay you money to be an actor, and you're just going to do as many of those roles as possible. And he was dating Diane Cannon, or he's married. Actually, he's married to Diane Cannon. I don't know if it was her or somebody that he was dating maybe in the 50s and 60s who was just like, why are you doing, Mr. Blandings builds his dream house, or the Bachelor or the Bobby Sox, or like what you're Cary Grant. You should be like picking, these much better movies here. But his mindset was, like I don't have to work with Hitchcock every time, or it's unexpected that I work with Hitchcock every time. It's expected that I make money as an actor, and that my agent books me on roles and I take these roles. And I wonder, like, yeah, for example, like a Nicolas Cage who grew up in sort of the second wave of that method world, right? So he's sort of the next generation of method actors after like the De Niro's and Pacino's and whatnot. If he's still got a sense of that, like I'm a working actor and I'm going to do my job as an actor on this film.
Well, I think there's probably people who are more familiar with Cage than I, who can probably answer that particular question. I don't know what sort of motivates him in these moments where we do see a sort of a flourishing once again of his talent.
Yeah. So, and we do get that here in this briefly this movie. So maybe I'll do a quick synopsis of this one here. 211. So 211, if you're not familiar, I don't know if you're familiar in England, that 211 is the police code for armed robbery. Um, so
I,
that's
do-
where that.
I love my police codes.
Yes, yeah, this is classic. I know that because Easy he mentioned that in multiple songs. I remember there's one of his songs was called "No More Questions," where a woman's like interviewing him, and essentially like what she does is she'll ask him a question, he'll answer it, and then it'll lead to the next verse. And so she's like, "Hey, Easy, have you ever been involved in like a holdup or an armed robbery?" And he goes, "You mean like a 211?" And she goes, "Yeah." And then he starts his rap about robbing a bank. So it's like that's how I know that term. 187 is murder, similar from hip hop rap music. They mentioned 187 in there. So those are the two police codes that I know. I think there's also an indecent exposure one that gets used. I think it's like five something, or that comes up from time to time as well.
Sounds good.
So yeah, so you're learning about police code. Yeah, so that's where this comes from here. But yeah, this movie it's basically what I mean. It's the before I get into it too deep, actually, I should mention that the director's name is York Alex Shackleton, and I don't know if when you saw that name, did you think maybe this is somebody who hiked Everest in the mid 50s or something like that? I mean, it sounded like a British adventurer, right? I think I don't know,
Yeah.
Sir Alex Shackleton.
It's a hell of a name, and I actually think that I looked it up because I was like, well, yeah,
Yeah,
is he related to anybody? And
right.
I think he started his career as just, I can't remember which way round it was. I think he started his career just as like Alex Shackleton, and
Yeah.
then recently he's added the York in, or added the Alex in to kind of make it more cumbersome, or more, perhaps more, maybe the idea is to make it more memorable, because I
Right.
certainly, York Alex Shackleton is now now going to be stuck in my head as a name.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So when I saw that, I was like, "Is he?" Yeah, I thought it's really he was like just a snowboarder who's now making movies, and he's making these kinds of movies. So I mean, he's definitely one of those bios that like he tells you all the great things he did as a snowboarder. So it's like kind of like, okay, get over yourself a bit. It's almost like he wants to live up to the Shackleton name. But yeah, it's if you were going to make a movie. A fictional movie about some kind of British explorer or adventurer or somebody, I guess because this movie starts in Afghanistan. I was trying to think of the name of the guy who predated, Lawrence from Lawrence of Arabia, who did his own adventure through Afghanistan. And
Oh,
yeah,
I read a book about him as well.
yeah,
Well, actually, you know what? He was there was an American guy called Hosea something who actually traveled out into Afghanistan in the I think in the 19th century, and he's sort of the story that Kipling wrote, which obviously the film The Man Who Would Be King was then ultimately based on. Is this guy is the meant to be sort of like partly the inspiration for the Kipling story, and subsequently what we see in that Sean Connery Michael Caine film.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was trying to say, because I read it, back in the early two, when I was in college in 01, 02. I was studying the Islamic world, and I was writing a paper on Afghanistan, which that was in the spring of 2001. So all of these books that I had to try and track down all over the place, uh, suddenly in September of 2001 were readily available, because it was like everybody wanted to know about Afghanistan suddenly. And so all these interlibrary loan things that I had to track down were suddenly everywhere. But I remember reading about that person, and the fact that, again, he would have predated Lawrence by, like, I guess, like, I don't know, 70, 80 years, something like that. That he But it was he kind of, like, he had to dye his skin so he would look more like one of the locals. And I think it was almost more of like a thing to where if he was found out, he would have been killed. It was sounded like a little bit more dangerous of an expedition. But he could have been a Shackleton, I was thinking.
Yeah, definitely. It's a name with a rich heritage. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure York's snowboarding really honors that moniker.
No, right. You've got all of these great, like, yeah, like, just leading an expedition to the South Pole or the North Pole, or trying to summit Mount Everest, or you're doing a front flip in the X Games, right? Like, those are
It's
that's
not
how
quite the
far it's
same.
fallen. Yeah, exactly. But yeah. So York is directing us our 211 movies. Again, the movie starts in Afghanistan, where we get your classic sequence, right, of somebody messing around on a computer, money being transferred, a smarmy looking guy in glasses and a suit, like, making weird, gross faces as the money's being transferred. And then, of course, they never get away, right? Well, sometimes they get away. That's the movie, is that the MacGuffin is whatever's in the suitcase. But in this case, they don't get away. There's a team of mercenaries who massacre them and all the Afghani soldiers that are there, helping them escape with the money on the briefcase. And the smarmy guy's last words, he mentions that some of his money is in a bank in Chesterfield, Massachusetts, which doesn't exist, but it is. We'll talk a little bit where that would be located in Massachusetts as we go in. Also, I was trying to look up that actor, because he has definitely a Massachusetts accent, but I wasn't sure. It didn't say where he's from. He's another one of those no picture on IMDb. But anyway, we get this sort of collision course to wackiness sequence, where these mercenaries are going to rob this bank in this town in Massachusetts, this suburb of Boston. At the same time that a young man is being bullied in school, and it's the classic. He strikes out to sort of defend himself when the teacher comes in and sees him attacking somebody, thinking he's the aggressor in the situation. And he has two options, or his mother has two options: let him be expelled, or do this ride along thing with the police. So the ride along is involving, you know, police officer Nicolas Cage, another actor played by Dwayne Cameron, who's from New Zealand, does a pretty good Boston accent for someone who's trying. He's definitely trying in this film. Yeah, they're kind of doing the ride along thing. They notice a black SUV in front of a bank and think that something's suspicious there. It turns out that, yeah, these mercenaries are robbing the bank, and so now it's like a huge, like, hostage situation, a standoff. Obviously these guys are undergunned, but it's like, how are they going to be able to do it? How are they going to defeat these baddies? And of course, we also have an Interpol agent who's tracking these baddies kind of across the world. And they kind of all come together in the end, I guess. But yeah, I guess I guess that's the kind of the best I can do for a synopsis there. So, what did you think of 211?
Well, I think you did very well with the synopsis, because this film puts some very strange elements into a blender and presses maximum blitz. And like, it was like, because as I'm sure we'll probably talk about, yeah, none of these elements really pay off in any way whatsoever. Like, it's very bizarre. Yeah, I'm afraid to say this I'm afraid to say this was a bit of a nothing burger again for me. Very strange. I think I probably had a bit more fun with 211 just because of the strange number of elements that it had in. You've got as you say, you've got this kid doing the ride along in the car. You also have a very ultimately turns out to be ultimately pointless subplot with Nicolas Cage's cop partner, McAvoy. Well, his daughter's pregnant, isn't it? It's Nicolas Cage's
Right.
daughter's pregnant, and she's in a relationship with Nicolas Cage's partner. They obviously, father and daughter are estranged for reasons we don't really know. And that arc goes absolutely nowhere within the film, like many of the arcs within this film go nowhere. The arc of Michael Rainey, who he's the actor who plays the kid Kenny in this film. His arc goes nowhere. And talking of things that are completely pointless and go nowhere, like, I mean, if you actually stop and think about this plot for a moment, why on earth are these group of mercenaries robbing this bank? Like, because they go in and they're just taking cash out of the vault. Well, they could have robbed any, if that's what they're going to do, they could have robbed any bank. Like, why, if the whole thing is they're robbing the bank where this guy, who they ripped, who's trying to rip them off at the beginning, has got his money stashed. Well, who's to say that those dollar bills stacked up in that vault are his? I mean, they could be anybody's. Like, there are the elements in this plot that just don't stand up to any scrutiny. And then I know there's a lot of elements that don't go anywhere either. So it was a very bizarre. I found it a very bizarre film.
Yeah, yeah. So I agree with you on first off on the blender explanation. I mean, I don't think it gets any more. I mean, like for example, the daughter, right? So that there's a few pieces of this daughter thing that are exactly paint by numbers. First off, the estrangement. I mean, I don't know how many Bruce Willis movies you follow the same pattern where you get this actress who's, I think Sophie Skelton, she fits the she's gone on to have a better career. So if you go look, she's done some better things, since. I mean, Outlander, I think, is the big one she does. Well, I guess she did Outlander before this movie, so she'd been doing better stuff before this. But the character is a definite one note, right? It is exactly what I was describing: tall, thin, flannel shirts painted on jeans. That's the character. Long hair as well, long hair, and long hair that's kind of just brushed down in a very simple way. I don't know how many actresses or how many actors play this part exactly this way in these movies, but she's exactly that part. And again, the estrangement from the dad as the head cop, and maybe even the husband or boyfriend being the guy who works with him. That's a they use that in so many of these movies. I mean, I don't know how many people played parts with Bruce Willis that were exactly what Steve McAvoy's doing with Nicolas Cage here. So you've got that piece there. The mercenaries robbing the bank, like you said. Usually there's a MacGuffin that they're going for, right? That's why they'd go to a specific bank. It's because
Yeah,
that specific bank would have something
there's
there.
something in a deposit box. They need to get the
Exactly.
thing out. Yeah.
Yeah, key to crypto code, a disk that has the money, something like that they could, would be in there. One of the things that I know about special forces guys, or that I've kind of learned, whether it's Navy SEALs or whatever, unless the government makes them go into a situation that is sort of a no-win, or, is dangerous, or, high risk, they generally don't put themselves in those situations. I know there's one kind of famous Navy SEAL guy who was being interviewed, and they said, "What would you do if a guy came at you with a knife?" And he's like, "Well, I'd run away, because I'm not going to fight somebody who has a knife just to fight somebody who has a knife. I get away from that situation." And that's kind of, the idea that special forces guys would put themselves in this situation, that this kind of a bank robbery. Yes, generally the bank robberies that come off well, especially in America, are somebody who just shows up with a fake mustache and sunglasses, hands a note to the person behind the counter, walks out with 30 grand. Like that's, you get away with that. This kind of robbery, you're not getting away with this. Like the odds of you getting out and being successful are very slim, because even if you escape, even if there's not this sort of just happens to be that Nicolas Cage is, they're getting coffee at the cafe across the street from the bank at the same time that the robbery's happening. Even if that doesn't happen, I mean, there are so many cameras everywhere. They're going to be
Yeah.
tracking this vehicle leaving that eventually they're going to track down who did it. So this wasn't a smart plan anyway. If all they needed was just money, I'm sure there's banks in Afghanistan they could have robbed that had that they would have gotten away with it more. So yeah, that part didn't make any sense either. And then of course our Nepo baby, Weston Cage. He's like a kind of a one note sniper character. But I mean, this is the core, the key of like when you think of like those 90s DTV actioners where it was like the producer got their girlfriend a part in the movie. I mean, that's what I mean, he was even having trouble smoking a cigarette, which I guess makes sense because he was born in 1990. He didn't grow up, but I mean, remember that scene where he's supposed to be smoking a cigarette and he can't hold it properly, he can't inhale. It was a trip.
Yeah, I actually came away from this film having a bit of a soft spot for Weston Cage because I really don't think I'm making no defense of him as a good actor because what little he gets to do as an actor in this film, he doesn't do it very well. But um he's fairly flavorless, but in fairness, kind of so is his part. But I could easily see him having, if he was born in, I don't know, the late 60s, I could easily, well, I would need to be earlier than late. If he was born in the early 60s, I could easily have seen him having like a good career, like during the 80s, like turning up as the third henchman in Gary Busey's biker gang or something, because
Right.
he does have a kind of a look. He's got these smoky eyes and he has these, I mean, it's not a great haircut, but it is very distinctive. He has these kind of curtains haircut.
Right.
And so he's got a kind of distinctive look that makes him look like he should be a background character in the remake of The Crow, or if they were remaking The Lost Boys, he should be sort of somewhere in the background for that. He definitely does have a look, and I could easily see him having had just being in these 80s video store actioners, as somebody's kind of third henchman or something. So I kind of, I'm afraid to say, Matt, I actually kind of enjoyed Weston Cage in this film, but I guess unlike Dangerous, he's very much in a small part in this film, so we're not. Given what we saw in here, I'm not sure I'm ready for a Weston Cage leading man performance.
No, I agree with you there. You make a really great point that like all of these movies just have these sort of one note bearded guys that play the baddies, the good guy. I mean,
Hmm.
the previous movie, Dangerous, it was just, Kevin Durand with a whole bunch of bearded guys that were going around, speaking with bad Southern accents and harassing people. And I mean, that's what you get in this movie too, right? It's a lot of one note bearded guys. And so from an aesthetic standpoint, Weston Cage does bring something else to the table. I wish I wish the person who's making, I wish York Shackleton, and maybe York Shackleton also. I mean, I don't know how, I think he's that young too. I want to say um, he might be a little bit older because I was going to say like, you'd think that somebody would have seen that scene of him smoking a cigarette and just said, "We're taking that out." He does not need to smoke a cigarette. It did nothing to advance the plot, right? Like it's not like there wasn't like a sequence where like he could see himself smoking. Oh, York Shackleton was born in '74, so forget that. Like he grew up in the age of smoking, so he knows what a person who's comfortable smoking a cigarette looks like, and they should have cut that scene out, and that
Hmm.
it did nothing to the plot. He could have been eating a sandwich, he could have been eating an MRE. He didn't need to smoke a cigarette there. Because it didn't do him any favors. I think, eating a sandwich, like for that kind of character, everybody eats sandwiches, right? That's something that's been done. It's something that's still being done, right? There wasn't like like a government ban on sandwich eating. There's no, right?
Yet.
Like you don't have to be 18 to eat a sandwich. You can eat a sandwich at any time. He could have done that and probably been looked a little bit more natural than he did with the cigarette. Because yeah, that was probably the one that betrayed him the most. I mean, some of his line deliveries were a little off as well, but like you
Hmm.
said, for a movie like this, where he's just a guy in the background who's sniping people and stuff like that, he doesn't need to have the greatest line delivery. So yeah, I think the one that betrayed him was the cigarette one. I think I could have done without that scene.
Yeah, and just to sort of pick up on something we were talking about earlier about things that go nowhere in this film, like a couple of others just popped into my head as well. One of the sort of plot elements that is introduced at the beginning of this film is that Nicolas Cage is about to retire. He's kind of facing down his retirement, and he doesn't look terribly happy about it. So you kind of think that's going to factor into the film at some point. It totally doesn't. There's a whole bit with that kid who's on the ride along, and he's obsessed by his mobile phone, and that various moments in the film where there's a big play about like he just won't leave his mobile phone behind, and you kind of think, well, that's presumably going to play a significant moment at some point. It doesn't, and like I mean, it's just like what are we doing here?
Yeah, that's a great point about the phone because I guess the point is supposed to be that there's that poignant moment where so Steve, the son-in-law, he gets shot in this bank robbery situation and he's bleeding out, right?
Mm,
It's the whole like "don't die on me, man" thing, where he's like I'm feeling cold, I can feel myself going, and he tells Kenny, he's like, well, you've got your phone, why don't you record me sending a last message to my wife and my unborn child, and it's supposed to be this poignant moment, which of course is not a poignant moment when he survives, right? It doesn't have the same punch. But also, too, didn't Cage take his phone away from him and put it in the glove box? And I thought,
he did.
yeah, I thought he was going to have to scramble through the front seat to find the phone while he's getting shot at to make this video. But no, he just pulls it out of his pocket. So unless I missed that part where he got the phone out of the glove
Yeah,
box.
you missed it. So when
Okay.
he's in the car, he's under fire, and like the cop, I can't remember whether it's Cage or the other one, is kind of yanking him out of the car. The kid sort of like makes a as he's being yanked out of the car, makes a grab, putting his entire life in danger to grab his phone, to open the glove box and grab his phone out of there. And I know what you're saying about, yeah, but like everyone's got a phone on them these days. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't need to be made into this big thing that it is. It's like, the phone could never have previously been mentioned, and he just pulls his phone out and makes that video. So it's just, and the only, I mean, it does factor into the kind of like the little stinger at the end for how the film wraps up with
Right.
Cage like, are you on your damn phone again, or something like that. And it's just like, really, is this why the phone has constantly been brought up as a thing for this payoff? I mean, it's so weak, it's not even a payoff.
Because I think there was this thread that they wanted to go through. I'm wondering if because sometimes these movies are police propaganda kind of deals. And it seems like there's a bit of that going on here about like, well, everybody's got a phone, everybody's recording cops, and it's like, I get that like everybody's recording cops, but it's like also police officers are entrusted with a certain level of responsibility that they should be getting recorded. That their action should be recorded. It's not like me, working for my job, where it's like, okay, did you do a great interview for a teacher that wants to be an online, in my case, but those are recorded. It's like somebody could watch them, but it's like, yeah, it's not the same level. Like there's no life or death kind of situations going on there. But he records a situation where like this guy who I'm assuming is probably someone who's housing insecure who hangs out at a gas station and apparently stole a carton of cigarettes, which I don't even know how you do that. I don't know how you steal a carton of cigarettes here in the United States because they are all kept behind the counter. He would have had to have somehow jumped behind the counter, grabbed these, and then walked out with them. And then after he did something so audacious, just stand out in front of the gas station and wait for the police to come to give him a hard time. But there's this thought that like the kid is going to be recording something untoward in that interaction, and he doesn't. And I don't know if maybe that's supposed to be this lesson to the kid that like, not all interactions the police have with the public are what you see on social media, that sometimes they have good interactions or sometimes they're just enforcing the
Mm.
law. But it wasn't clear that that's what the message was. Like they didn't, when Cage takes the phone away, he doesn't say, "Yeah, do you see? This is what we do every day. We're not, I didn't beat that guy up. I didn't harass him, even though I did probably illegally search his bag. All of these kinds of things. But I didn't, I didn't do all the things that you're expecting us to have done. There was no mention of that either. It was You're right. Like it was one of these threads that just sort of dangling there that Mr. York Shackleton thought might be good at some point, but just never my sense is that York Shackleton, if he was one of those English expeditioners, he would have probably made it off the boat in Antarctica, waited at a whaling station, and got picked up and sent back to England. So yes.
Or he would have been one of those ones who kind of like sort of like encounters some new culture, sort of steams straight in and is immediately killed through some sort of ridiculous misunderstanding.
Right. Right, exactly. Right. It kind of there's this footnote in anthropological
Yes.
handbooks about what you don't do when you like yeah. York Shackleton was actually eaten alive by
Yes.
cannibals in the South Pacific after he went in guns a blazing and uh, broke many norms in that situation. These are the things we don't do as anthropologists, and this is why because nobody wants to be in almost like see like the comedic like large metal pot that he's like sort of sitting in or something like that.
Exactly. Yes. Through
Yeah.
some, he sort of indicates he's perfectly happy to be eaten alive by this culture or something through some, you know, some absurd misinterpretation. But yeah, as you say, a sort of an amusing footnote in an anthropology book. But yeah, again, no great achievements for Mr. York Shackleton.
No, no, exactly. Now with Nicolas Cage here, I think one of the big differences between him and Mel Gibson is that Mel Gibson just sort of exudes this natural charisma that just made him such a megastar in the 90s. And it's like even when he's like drinking and his hair's a mess and he's just, trying to be like a Bob Newhart, level therapist on the phone with Scott Eastwood, there's something there about there's that magnetic quality there. Whereas, Nicolas Cage, I think he has some of that. He has that leading man quality. But I mean, you get these sequences like when he's talking to Kenny about what got him, on this ride along, which probably is the most believable thing in this movie is the fact that nobody would ask why Kenny should be in this ride along, right? The cops wouldn't have been like, "Huh, maybe you don't deserve it," or what led you to this? Like they would
Mm.
usually shoot first and maybe ask questions later. So it actually kind of was like the most believable piece of the movie. But it is fascinating that you see this Nicolas Cage just sort of like talking to this kid, and you can also see the difference in like the kid's level of acting, where he's just trying to be a kid, who's 21 years old but playing, 13, versus Cage, who is just like, just kind of going, not going through the motions. It's more like he's just so good at it that he can just sort of like give just kind of just do it and it works.
Yeah, I don't really feel like Nicolas Cage is getting out of second gear at all in this film, and
Right.
he's not. He's still decent. I mean, it's not a good performance, but it's certainly not a bad performance, and he's given the best performance given the best performance in the entire film. But yeah, he can I guess it just shows you what an actor he is, that he's perfectly serviceable without ever getting out of second gear in this entire movie, and he's still the best thing in it from an
Right,
acting
exactly.
standpoint.
Yeah, it's kind of it's one of those things that, I guess, with all of these names that are kind of dropping down. It's a fascinating one with him where he's just like, yeah, I mean he does give us the one scene where he is talking to the higher up who, again, painting by numbers. We've got the higher up who's the pain in the ass that doesn't is getting in the way, doesn't want to help, doesn't know what he's doing, all that kind of stuff. And Cage starts yelling at him, like, my son was shot, which of course it was your son-in-law, but I guess we don't want to get those details in the way or whatever.
Yeah, but like I really bumped on that moment. It's like, didn't was no one picking up on that? Like
Right.
who was? I mean, so presumably the director was there when that scene was being filmed. Presumably
Yeah.
he knows what film is they're shooting here. Like that was just like
Yeah.
forget the hat on Scott Eastwood's head in Dangerous. Like this was a shocking continuity error.
Yeah, yeah, and it's fascinating because again with Nicolas Cage, like if there's this sense of like, well, we got this first take, we don't want to lose it, right? We don't want to do another take because you won't be able to do that again. I almost feel like it's the other way around. I feel like Nicolas Cage is the kind of actor who should be able to reproduce that on multiple takes.
Yeah, I mean, look, throughout his career, if there's one thing Nicolas Cage is not averse to, it is yelling loudly. So like, I can't believe, you couldn't have got him to do another take where, and it's like, please, Nicholas, could you just say daughter rather than son in when you do that again?
Yeah, or son-in-law is shot, right?
Yeah.
Son-in-law was, yeah. I mean, there has to be. I don't know with the Nicolas Cage, like what it's like when you were, on these big budget productions. You're the kind of the biggest name in these productions. They're centering everything around you. To be in a similar situation, but to be doing it in Bulgaria, and a Bulgaria that's doubling as Massachusetts. And as you're driving down these highways that you're seeing cars that the director or the editor didn't blur out the fact that they have European license plates. That you're
And they're like Trabants as well.
right, exactly. It's like all of this kind of stuff. I mean, you're seeing this, and granted, you're acting opposite this guy from New Zealand who's trying to give it his best with the Boston accent, and Cage is like, I'm not even going to do a Boston accent. I'm not even going to bother with it. I'm not even try it. But I can't imagine what that feels like. That even if you're a professional, and maybe it's the fact that he got to act with his son. I don't know, but there does have to be something that's like kind of soul crushing about it. That even if you just need the money and you're like, I bought an island and I bought dinosaur bones and I bought Action Comics #1 or whatever number it was that Superman was, and I need the money really bad. Uh, there's got to be something about that where you're just like, what did I do? What have I done to myself? How did I get here?
Yeah, because who's Nicolas Cage worked with over the course of his career? I mean, he's worked with Scorsese. I can't think of like who are the other sort of like really good directors
Oh,
that
I mean,
he's worked
The
with the
Rock with
Coens,
Michael
hasn't he?
Bay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of everyone, right? I mean, obviously, I mean, he's won an Oscar for the movie, for Leaving
Leaving Las
Las Vegas.
Vegas, yeah.
But I mean, yeah, John Woo, Scorsese, yeah, I mean, I'm assuming other kind of big.
Was it Mike
I don't know.
Nichols was Leaving Las Vegas, Mike Nichols' film? Or was it Mike
Yes,
Fig? Yeah. So
I
he's
think
worked,
so.
he knows what like a great director is like to work with. And yeah, it is, I, I, yeah, it's an interesting question as to, okay, how does he
Oh, Mike
knows
Figgis.
what it's like. Yeah. Mike Figgis. Yeah.
Yeah,
So he knows what it's like to work with like, truly great people who are like trying to get like a truly great performance out of him. And then he's, yeah, on this Bulgarian backlot. They've probably got to shoot this whole thing in 18 days. So that's that's why you can refer to your start yelling about your son, and nobody really picks up on it. It's because like, well, we've got to move on to the next setup. So
right.
that's in the can now. So we're going with that. So it's yeah. I don't. It would be. It'd be good to find yourself on a flight sat next to Nicolas Cage and just have a little quiet heart to heart with him and just say, what were you thinking in these moments? Were you just thinking I'm another $300,000 closer to getting out of bankruptcy, or what was going through your head in these moments?
Yeah, I mean that has to be it. I mean, I guess also too, right, is that for that 18 days you're there with your son, you do some bonding. I'm assuming because I think, he and his the mother, they split up. So, I don't know like how much time he would always get, especially since he was born in 1990. Weston, that like maybe, this is a moment I can bond with my son here. Maybe that's what he's looking for. That's like the positive in it is to, you can watch dad work, kind of thing. I
Well,
don't know.
IMDb in the trivia for this film, it says that this is the fourth collaboration between Nicolas
Right.
Cage and Weston Cage, and I just thought they're really not collaborating on this film, are they? Like,
No,
you are really gilding the lily there by calling
right,
this a collaboration.
right. Well, and it said in the trivia too that he broke his ankle filming the movie and it said it was out of action for 2 weeks, which that has got to be. I mean, and it also said that he didn't like the final cut. The movie was
Mm.
disappointing, all that kind of stuff. The vice principal's character was misspelled. The vice principal was spelled. I think it was spelled like a principal that you have as opposed to like a main person, but like I guess what would be the way you'd say it, like a value, right? I think is how it
Yeah.
was spelled. Yeah. So all this kind of stuff that was, I mean, to get a broken ankle out of a movie, I can't even imagine. I mean, we saw a horribly fake broken ankle in the previous film in Dangerous, where the annoying character twists his ankle in a sequence. But to be doing a movie like this and break your ankle in the process, that that's got to be like just adding salt in the wound.
Yeah, you've got to be having a long, dark night of the soul, aren't you? After that, you're in Bulgaria, you're in a Bulgarian A&E with your
Yeah.
with your broken ankle, thinking, oh, like how did my career come to this?
Yeah. Yeah, I can't even I mean, I guess you probably getting the best of care in Bulgaria, which it probably equates to probably the best of care in Bulgaria is probably still a fraction of what it would cost here in America. So yeah, to give yourself and other listeners a sense of what medical care costs, when Kate Middleton had the first baby, obviously she was getting like top-notch care in the UK, getting the best of possible. That's what an average birth costs here in America. That's how inflated medical costs are in here. Is that, and I'm not, you're obviously you're not getting the same level of care that Kate Middleton got for that price. You're getting the obstetrician going between three births at the same time, and that kind of thing. But that's how expensive it is. So at least I guess if you're breaking your ankle in Bulgaria and you're Nicolas Cage, you're probably getting the best orthopedic surgeons working on your ankle there for a fraction of the cost. And for someone like him who was trying to count costs at that time, it probably did help in that sense.
You wonder actually, you wonder how much that actually sort of played into the final film that we get, because I would be they must have then had to shoot round the fact that he's he would have been back on set 2 weeks later, but he's still going to have a broken ankle, so it must have factored it. They must have had to then shoot round that. So you wonder how much that affected ultimately the film that we got here. So we're making, well, I was going to say, we're making a lot of criticisms here of York Shackleton, so maybe we should be a bit kinder towards him given the circumstances he had to work with. But I think, frankly, there's enough here that had nothing to do with Nicolas Cage's ankles that suggests that he doesn't really know what he's doing. He might be able to pull a 720 on a kind of an X Games, but yeah. Given the scene with three actors and 3 pages of dialogue, he hasn't got a Scooby.
Well, you make a great point too, because I wonder now that you mention this, the whole thing with the Interpol agent. The actress's name was Alexandra Dinu, I believe. I think that's who it was. She is, you know, she's done more of these kinds of movies, but her character really is kind of similar to Famke Janssen's character, right?
Yes.
That she doesn't really play a part in getting us to the end here in this film. She's just someone who's just there. And I wonder if like maybe they shot those scenes that take place in quotes Kabul, close quote, or the sequence of her going to the quote gun shop, the in Massachusetts gun shop, close quote, that are all in Bulgaria. I wonder if they shot that stuff after the fact to kind of fill out the fact that they were missing plot points that they would have had more, Nicolas Cage. Or maybe there is more Nicolas Cage of him, like there was supposed to be more of him in the film that they couldn't do.
Maybe, but I'm going to go off on a tangent here. But I've got an interesting bit of trivia about that particular actress. I think you're a bit of a soccer fan, as I'm sure
Yes.
you call it, Matt. But that actress or that lady is the former ex-wife of a famous Romanian and Chelsea footballer called Adrian Mutu, who
Oh,
achieved notoriety after he was found to be snorting cocaine and had to serve a lengthy drugs ban. But I was very surprised to see that bit of trivia. But actually, if I can continue my digression, Matt. But
yes.
given that we're talking about Nepo Babies, is the kind of thread running through the films that we're looking at today. There's more nepotism in the cast of 211, because I don't know if you spotted. I was just kind of randomly clicking on actors that one of the kind of gang of mercenaries in this film is Michael Belisario, who it turns out is the son of Donald Belisario of Quantum Leap, NCIS, and Jag fame.
I never would have put that. I didn't even. I see again. I wasn't even thinking along those lines because I was thinking, he was like an Italian actor that they just pulled into the film from Rose. But that is amazing. And so and it looks like there's a whole bunch of
I
family member
guess
that,
I
yeah,
know. This it
yeah,
just speaks to every rock you turn over. There's
yeah,
more Nepo babies. I was completely unaware that Donald Belisario, yeah, had a whole bunch of children by a variety of different wives who are
yeah.
all bloody actors now as well.
Yes. Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. It's so, and again, it's like, this is maybe not so much a name that you're trading on, right? Because they're not putting Belisario on the top billing of anything to be like, oh, hey, it's Belisario. Though I guess if it was a production, maybe you could say it's a Belisario production, and that might
Yeah.
that might move the needle a bit. But the fact that again he's getting into his entree into the business is somebody of the caliber of Donald P. Bellisario. I mean, just the people he would have been meeting, right, as a
Oh,
kid, probably
and
sneak.
also more than that, you're not telling me that Michael Belisario is paying all the bills by little bit part roles in things like 211 and the pretty sorry filmography that he's got. The only reason that he can continue, like, inverted commas, playing as an actor is, is probably because he's had a very healthy, like, endowment from dad, who has made, God, I mean, he must have made an absolute fortune out of. I mean, he's had so many hit shows over the years. He must have made an absolute fortune. So yeah, I mean, yeah. So it's not just the entrees into it. It's the fact that he's probably living off of dad's money, and so he's able to kind of, yeah, continue it kind of playing as an actor in a way in which somebody else who, has to pay the mortgage and pay the electricity bills just wouldn't be able to do.
Yeah, now that is a common thing in America with all kinds of different professions. I mean, journalism, for example, like to get into the business in journalism, you have to do unpaid internships, and it's like, well, who can afford to be an unpaid intern, right? It's
Mm.
the children. I mean, I think probably one of the more famous ones is Ronan Farrow, right? Obviously, of a child of Woody Allen and Mia Farrow. But but similar to the acting bits, right? Is that like if you're a starving actor who is trying to make it as like waiting tables or something in LA and trying to pick up any role you can, it's a little different from being Michael Bellisario where dad's paying your rent, and it's like a barely a rounding error on what he's worth, and so yeah, so not only are you getting the introductions through your dad, but you're right, like you've got the ability to not, and I guess Weston Cage is probably I would say Weston Cage is in a similar situation. I'm assuming part of the reason why Nicolas Cage is so broke is that he was having to pay, right, child support for Weston Cage. The last thing you want to be is an actor who is on the delinquent child support, in the tabloids. So that's probably part of the reason why he would have been able as well to kind of, sort of float around. And Scott Eastwood's another one, right? I mean, Scott Eastwood was probably not slumming it in a roach infested, apartment in East LA or something while he's trying to make it in the biz, right? He's living in Brentwood or whatever, maybe just
Yeah.
driving a sports car to his next gig. So that's another good point about this nepotism thing is that it also there's a privilege afforded with that means that you can afford to take more risks, but also you can afford to take roles that don't pay you as much.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, they're just kind of able to just sort of exist in a way in which, yeah, as you say, somebody else who's like, they're scrabbling around, waiting tables, going to umpteen auditions, getting the odd sort of, getting the odd appearance in the background of an episode of, I don't know, some episode of the FBI, FBI universe of things. And, eventually after 2 or 3 years of that, you're like, my career's going nowhere. It's time I get a real job. And, some of these kids don't have to worry about that.
Right. There's no point that you have to get a real job. I remember there was a major case in LA featuring an actor or somebody who was being prosecuted. And the prosecutor was this LA attorney who was trying to make it as an actor in LA, waiting tables, and he went to law school while he was waiting tables and trying to make it as an actor, and then suddenly like kind of worked his way up to the DA position or assistant DA position in LA. But you're right, like there's that point where you have to give up the ghost, and none of these people need to give up the ghost, right? You're just always, you know, you've got between the name recognition and the fact that financially you're always going to be in a secure place. you never have to give up the ghost. You can always just kind of float by on these low rolls, for in perpetuity.
It's not. It's nice. It sounds like a nice life, doesn't it? I mean, what I mean. But like, what is the? I mean, I mean, I was thinking about this. Like, what? I mean, it really. It really offends my sense of fairness. This sort of aspect of things. But I was also just thinking, like, I mean, I don't know about you. I was thinking about this issue, and I was thinking about, like, my sort of group of friends. There's only one of my friends has kind of followed their father into the same line of work, and even he could make the case, well, I haven't really followed them in, like, because he also does something else. He's got a couple of jobs on the go. So, but what I mean, I don't know about yourself. I don't do the same thing as my dad. I don't know. None of my friends do. But like, if you're an actor, if you're a journalist, I mean, politics as well, that's rife with this sort of nepotism as well. It's like, they just can't conceive of any other fucking thing to do other than like what their parent did.
Right. And we even see it in athletics, because, in the past, right, parents, fathers who played sports, they generally didn't make a lot of money, so they would have to do other jobs, they have to do other things. But now that they make so much money, they can kind of devote all their time to their craft, and they can also devote that time to training their kids. And so, like, I mean, probably the biggest case of nepotism for that here in America is LeBron James's son, who,
Mm.
by all accounts, is not good enough to be playing in the NBA. But LeBron James was like, well, I want him on this team. And it's like, okay, well, he's partially running the Lakers that he plays for, so that he's playing there. But for example, here in Philadelphia, this pitcher from in the 80s and 90s, Roger Clemens, who would be in the Hall of Fame except for the fact that he took steroids probably in the late 90s, early 2000s, and so nobody's voting him in. But he was one of the best pitchers ever. I remember he was appointment viewing here in New England when I was growing up. But his son plays for the Philadelphia Phillies. He's like kind of like a low level, hitter and fielder who he kind of bounces between the two levels, because in baseball in America, the teams don't get promoted or relegated, but the players do. They
Mm.
kind of move up and down. So he's like a middling player. But the thing is that he's not there from nepotism in the sense that, like, Roger Clemens can't get his son a job playing baseball, right? If he's good enough to play, he has to be good enough to play to be able to make it. But he gets this sort of top-notch training. He gets this sort of, all of these different, connections and things like that make it a little bit easier. And we're starting to see that more in professional sports, that like sons of players are starting to play more now. So it's an interesting piece of this nepotism where you'd say, like, okay, well, you have to have the athletic ability to be able to play at the highest level. But there are elements to get to that highest level that having a father who played helps, in terms of training, knowing the right people to get the kind of training you're supposed to get, so that you get that athletic ability, sort of passed down genetically. But then there's these other pieces of it too that add to the nepotism.
Yeah, and I would see sports or athletics as somewhat different to say the world of acting, because there is a like objective um way of like measuring how good they actually are. Like, so if you're if you're a runner or a sprinter or a long distance athlete, if you're not making the times, you're
Right.
not winning races, you're not getting selected for like the kind of the Great British Olympic team or whatever. And it doesn't really matter who your parent is. Like, if you're not running the times, then you're not going to get in those races, and you're not going to go anywhere in the career. I mean, I think, and even in, say, things like football, people's, the success of the team is the dominant factor there. So, like, there can't be a passenger in that team, no matter who your dad is. If you're not if you're not contributing to the team's success, well, then you're not going to select it, you're not going to get play. I mean, that said, there is still, like, definitely those connections, like, definitely open doors, but ultimately, you're judged on your performance. So I've kind of, there is a sort of bottom line there that weeds out the kind of like the no marks from those who can actually do it, which I don't feel that same sort of thing exists in the world of acting, because I know, I guess it's just because you can just find your level, can't you? Maybe you end up in kind of Hallmark Channel like daytime movies or something. But it's still inverted commas acting, and you can kind of because dad's paid for your pad, you can still get away with it.
Well, you're right, and there's also the name piece of it too. And it is interesting because in both of these cases, so Cage, Weston Cage, he started out as Weston Coppola, and then he just kind of is now Weston Cage. And Scott Eastwood started out as Scott Reeves and then went to Scott Eastwood. So there's this a sense of like, well, if I don't use the name, I'm not trading on the name, then I'm really trying to make it. And I wonder if there's a point where they just realize like that I had all these doors open to me anyway. It doesn't matter if I have the name or not. I'm still, I might as well just use it because, or maybe they also give up and they're like, I need to use the name, right? Because I'm not getting roles. And it's like, I might as well just, fire that bullet that I've got there. But you're right, because acting has a kind of a dual piece of it where it's the doors that get opened from the nepotism and then the name that also carries sway in a way that I guess politics is similar to that, right? That if you see a name on the ballot that you recognize, you might be more likely to vote for that person. But seeing the name Cage on the tin and thinking maybe it's Nicolas Cage, but it's actually Weston Cage, it still carries something as well.
Quite what is hard to measure, and I think perhaps people within the industry overrate it because I came for Nicolas Cage, but I got Weston Cage. I mean, I can't think anyone's going to be happy with that.
Right, exactly. That's a good point. That's a good point. And to your other point that you're making about following in your father's footsteps, I definitely my dad worked in construction, and I definitely didn't do that. But I remember, and I don't know if my friend watched too many movies, like where if a young woman is an army brat, her dad was a cop, suddenly she can handle a weapon and work in combat situations really easily. But I remember I went over to my friend's place when he was building a shed in the backyard, and he was asking me about like using a bandsaw and things like that. And I was like, I have no idea. I don't know. And he's like, but I thought because your dad's in construction. I thought you, and I was like, yeah, he was in construction. I wasn't the one waking up at 3 a.m. to go to construction sites. I was sleeping in my nice warm bed and then going to school and stuff. I didn't learn any of that stuff. And so, but it is kind of funny that he figured that I did know because my dad, what I know is how difficult it is to do that kind of stuff. That's more what I know.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it's very 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 peculiar to assume that sort of that it just cascades down the genes.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Now, one thing I wanted to mention about this movie as we're kind of closing in on the end here is that according to IMDb's trivia, the zip code that they mentioned in the film places this location, Chesterford, Massachusetts, in Middlesex County in Massachusetts, which that name does come from the Middlesex County in England, like most counties. I think there's only one county in Massachusetts. It's not doesn't come from England, and that's Nantucket County, which is just it's the island. I think it's Wampanoag or Natick language for faraway island. So that's the only county there. But it is a very interesting county because it's right between. It's essentially between Boston and this other city, Worcester. It's about 100,000 people. But it is because of the way Boston is designed, it includes like Cambridge, which has Harvard in it. And so if you were in Boston and you went to Cambridge, you wouldn't even know that you left Boston in a lot of cases. I know when my wife and I went there, we thought it's on the subway line. You feel like you're just in Boston, but it's actually Cambridge. But yeah, it was hard to kind of place where this would have taken place in that milieu because that area, it could be suburban cities that are 100,000 people, or it could be more rural counties that are maybe 20, 30,000 people. So it's an interesting area of the country, and it was interesting that they decided to set the movie there because it is. I guess the only reason why they decided to set the movie there is because Massachusetts is closer to Europe and sort of housing designs and things like that, but it doesn't look anything like Sofia, Bulgaria. It's a very distinct part of the country. And so, I mean, I guess population-wise, it would have fit what they were trying to go for here, with it being a bigger population area with the highways and stuff like that. But yeah, it was just a very interesting place. So some famous people that are from there. Jack Kerouac is probably one of the more famous. I think John Krasinski, because I think he's from Newton, Mass. He's from that county as well. So some famous people, but of course, none of them get mentioned here. But yeah, it was just interesting that that they decided to set the movie there because of all the places to set the one of these direct to video movies. That's where they decided to put it.
You know what, Matt? I think you may have spent longer thinking about where they set this film than anyone involved with the film itself.
Right, exactly. Well, because I guess I grew up, I don't know, like an hour from that area. So yeah, I kind of know it. Or actually even 45 minutes because of how big the county is. The other thing too, for American listeners, counties in New England don't mean the same thing that they mean in other parts of the United States. Like, and I don't know if you're aware of this either, that like in the South, for example, counties are a big deal. Like you recognize where you're from based on your county. They put them on the license plate. So like for example, if you're from maybe like Gwinnett County in Atlanta and you go to a more rural part of Georgia, they see Gwinnett County on the license plate and go, "Oh, you don't belong here, right? This is that, you know." And so, but in
I'd expect
Massachusetts,
nothing else in the South.
right, exactly. And actually, where I'm from in Maine, where I'm from is more like kind of Massachusetts, New Hampshire, all these other New England states where the counties don't matter. But further north of me, they do care about the counties. They do label people as being from certain counties. This large, massive county in the top half of the state is called Aroostook County. I think maybe by area, by land area, it might be the biggest county in America, not by population at all. But they just call it the county. That's the expression they give it. It's just, and so that's what it's known as, is the county. So it's kind of interesting where I grew up, where counties kind of matter in that southern context for further north in Maine. But for the most part, counties really all they do is it just determines who you get for a judge and where your court case is going to be handled in most of New England. And pretty much other than like a few like First Nations people names, for the most part in those five New England states, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Vermont, Connecticut, and Rhode Island, they're all named after counties in England, or famous people or people from England who founded the areas. And so they have a very kind of I say colonial feel, but like kind of a old English kind of feel to them in that sense of like the naming and all of that. And so I wonder if maybe they thought it's closer to Europe in that sense, 'cause like Boston is closer to Europe. It's laid out like London, where like it's not like some gridded street pattern. It's just kind of all over the place. And I wonder if they just thought that would be closer to what they're getting there in Bulgaria, but it still doesn't look like it. You still know you're not in America when you watch these movies.
Yeah, it's very clearly Bulgarian backlot, and I mean there's another clue to it because they clearly there's a lot of dubbing in this film because obviously I think they're just hiding the fact that the background characters and the bit part players are, a lot of them are Bulgarian, and obviously won't have a convincing Boston, Massachusetts accent in their toolbox.
Yeah, well, because that's interesting about the guy who plays Steve, right? Who plays the son-in-law. He's from New Zealand, and he definitely tries to affect a Boston accent or like a mass accent in the film. And I wonder if that was a selling point to some. Maybe that's why they would set it in Massachusetts, is you get like, hey, you get to try out your mass accent for
This
the
is
real
the only American accent I can do, so we
right.
set it there.
Exactly. That could be it too, right? It's like, did you want to be in the town part two? Now, granted, like, what was it, Sophia Skelton, who's from England, who plays our one note female character in the film. She's from England. She doesn't try any kind of accent. She's just, I'm to do a standard American accent. That's the best you're going to get from me. Which I think it would have been awesome if if she was trying to do the accent as well. I mean, there could have been more fun with that kind of thing in there, but yeah, nobody was doing that.
Well, I know it's a constant source of amusement, isn't it? The sort of actors attempting a Boston accent.
Yes, yes. Which my friend discovered that actually the original Yorkshire accent sounds very close to the Boston accent. That apparently, like, I don't know when it would have probably
Ooh.
been around the time 17th, 18th century that accent sounds very close to the Boston accent. So we were joking about getting like Mark Wahlberg and a bunch of like Boston actors to play like a Yorkshire period piece or something like that.
I'd love to see it.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I was trying to think if I had anything else on this film other than a huge rant on the location that again was just sort of used but not really used in the film. But yeah, I don't know if you had anything else on this movie.
I just a couple of like amusing details that I noticed in the film. So yeah, after the kind of the villains set off that bomb obviously that loads of people are heading in, injured people are being taken into the hospital, and the kind of there's an establishing shot as this camera goes down, through the hospital, and we see this guy in a corridor. He's on a bed in a corridor, and he's missing his entire leg, whilst sort of somebody stands over him. And into shot, there's somebody being sort of wheeled in on a gurney who doesn't appear to be injured at all. They're being wheeled straight into ER, whilst the guy who's missing his leg is just being untended and left in the corridor. And it's like, what? Who's running this? Who's running this hospital?
Yeah. Yeah, that was it. What I love too is that you find out that that Kenny's mom is like kind of like the head, like the charge doctor, I guess, the head doctor for the emergency room, and also that the daughter, Cage's daughter, finds out that her husband is being, is there. And I love the idea that, like, okay, they're operating on my husband. So what am I going to do? I'm going to nudge my way in and just sort of prevent the doctors from getting to where the wound is and all that. And I love too how the doctors are like, ma'am, just get out of the way and let us do our job. And then that's it. They just let her sit there right in the way. And it's like, I mean, for me, I just can't imagine, like, yes, if it was a, family member and I want to make sure they're okay, I totally get that. But like, I don't know, like the last thing I would want to do is be like kind of elbowing my way in and getting in the way of the doctors.
Being the reason that my husband died because
exactly right.
He couldn't get the critical medical care he needed.
Yeah. So can we just reach around you to get this bullet out of your son's thigh or your husband's thigh? Oh yes. Sorry. Let me just get out of the way here. I'm sorry. It's like, oh yeah, it was that was kind of a trip. And it did kind of remind me. The other thing too about this area of the United States is that there was the bombing during the Boston Marathon that happened in 2013. And it happened in the nexus of like some of like the greatest hospitals in the world. And so it kind of kept the death count down. Only like 3 people died in that, but a lot of people were maimed. But that is a piece of this that doesn't really get mentioned. There's kind of this whole like triaging and like, oh, no elective surgeries today, all that kind of stuff. That's probably not how it would work. Because again, there's a lot of really great hospitals that are very close by to where this is all happening. And they would just be taking these patients, right? You wouldn't be like some kind of, smaller suburban hospitals not dealing with somebody whose leg was blown off and them trying to reattach it. They would be flying them to one of the nice hospitals in Boston where, the foremost expert on reattaching limbs would be doing it, So that's another piece of this that like, I think they probably shouldn't have said it where they said it, because it's not some out of the way suburban place where this hospital's got to try to figure out how they're going to triage all of this stuff. No, they'd be moving these patients to all different hospitals, which again, some of these would be like the best hospitals in the world.
I wish you were a producer on this film, Matt, and I wish I could see York Alex Shackleton's face as he reads your notes, right. and he's just going, he's going on about the triaging in the hospital.
Right. What? Right. It's like, fine, we're just going to set it in New Mexico and call it good. Okay. All right. You're right. I just thought it'd be fun to put it in Massachusetts, but you're going to go all, realistic Massachusetts on me here. Fine. Yeah, we're Santa Fe. That's it. How many great hospitals are in Santa Fe, Matt? Yeah.
And then I think the last sort of little note I had, which I found quite interesting. I kind of wish the film had made more of it. There's a moment within the film where Weston Cage looks down his sniper rifle and he's got his dad in like lined up in the sights, and you're kind of like, okay, this is presumably like, if people must be aware of like they must be aware of what they're doing here, but they don't do anything with it. It's like, just need him to, I don't know, just need him to say, it's your lucky day or something. I mean, and he goes and shoots somebody else. You need to like make a moment of it, like just open goals, just missed.
Yeah, it's your lucky day would be great, or if you called him Pops. Oh, I got you right here, Pops. And like maybe if like again with the phone, right? We talked about how the phone wasn't really playing a part in the movie. If he takes Kenny's phone and he reflects the light so it blinds him for a second so he can get away, like, yeah, not today, Sonny, something like that, that could have been kind of a funny interplay. I know what you mean there. It was definitely a missed. I thought they were going to do more with it, I think, to your point.
And you just like, and if you can't do more of it in a film like 211, then when the hell else can you do it?
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great point there too. Yeah. Now, I had one last thing for this movie. Again, another storyline that doesn't really go anywhere is the bank manager, who is supposedly called into work on his. I get the sense it wasn't that he was called into work on his anniversary. I think he forgot to request the day off. I think that's really what it was. But he's there. He's kind of this big older guy, and there's a sequence near the end of the movie where he stands up to the baddies and he says to one of them like, "Hey, you want to shoot me in the head? You want to shoot me in the head?" And he's like, "Yeah, I want to shoot you in the head." Bam, blows his head out and plugs him between the eyes, and that's it. He's dead. And we don't really get anything like the wife doesn't like, "Oh my god, I lost my husband who was supposed to be coming home to like like we don't we could at the very least have her sitting at a table, an empty table, and then she finds out the news. Like we don't get anything more from her. So it was a wasted thing. But it also took me back to the one time I went to England in '97. It was a school trip. And we were in a bar in Earl's Court with these two Scottish guys. Because my friend who was on the trip with me, we were both 18, and we were like, he was like, "Why are we drinking in hotel rooms? We do that in America. We're 18. We can actually go to the bars here in England, you know." So we started going to the bars, and we met these two drunk Scotsmen who lived in Wimbledon. And I remember one of them, he was like wasting. He was talking about muggings in America, and he's like, "If a guy put his gun to my head and was like, I want your wallet," I'd be like, "Hey, you can shoot me if you want." And I was like, yeah, well, he's going to shoot you and take your wallet. That's exactly what's going to happen. And I hadn't thought about that moment at all until this sequence here when the guy is like, "You're going to shoot me in the head." It's like, if somebody's has a gun to your head, challenging them to shoot you in the head is probably psychologically the dumbest thing you can do. But it seems to happen. And it happens in these movies, but also this Scotsman. I don't think if he was actually in New York City and somebody put a gun to his head or here in Philly, I don't think he'd be like, "You can shoot me if you want, but you're not going to get my wallet." I don't think I think he'd hand over the wallet probably. I think he was kind of more bluster in a bar or in a pub. But it just reminded me of that conversation where I was like, yeah, he'll shoot you in the head and take your wallet, and then you'll be then you'll be dead with no wallet. So if that's what you want to do, that's fine.
Yeah, it was one of those moments. It's a kind of stock. It was a stock moment within the film, but it happened in the wrong place because that type of moment needs to sort of happen probably quite early in the
Yeah.
bank raid, because then that establishes these guys are really serious. Like,
Yeah.
they're not messing about. But by this point, they've like set off a bomb, blown up an entire restaurant, injuring God knows how many people. They've engaged in machine gun battles, like with the cops outside killing umpteen other people. So we don't need any more, frankly, convincing that these people, have place no value on human life and will take it without compunction.
Well, and also if we're going to establish that this guy has a loving wife at home who's waiting to have, like why don't we get him home so he can have that dinner? Like why that should be the goal of the film, is to get him home so he can be sitting there at that dinner. Maybe, right, maybe the joke is that, well, not the joke, but the touching sequence is in the hospital. He's getting checked out at the hospital and she comes in with a bottle of wine and says, "Okay, we'll have our anniversary dinner here. I'm just so happy you're alive." But instead, no, they just kill him off.
There you go. That works a lot better for me.
Yeah, I just have all these ideas about, yeah, setting the film in Massachusetts, why that doesn't work, and yeah, why you don't need to be killing this guy, and yeah, all this kind of stuff here. So, yeah, perfect. Yeah, I don't know anything else at this point. I know I've kind of rambled on about a couple things here.
No, I think I'm code 4 on 211.
Okay, perfect. Yes, I think we have a lot of code for it. I think we also had a lot of copy that's in this movie as well. I think, yeah. So, yeah. Well, Will, as we're wrapping up, anything that you wanted to plug?
Sure. Well, if you've not come across one of my appearances before on this podcast, I run Exploding Helicopter, which is a podcast dedicated to the strange way that helicopters keep blowing up in movies. So we've got a website, explodinghelicopter.com. We've got a podcast, which you can find anywhere you listen to podcasts. It's cryptically called Exploding Helicopter. We're on a bunch of social media. We're in most places, so you can find us on X, Blue Sky, Instagram, Facebook. We're on YouTube as well. So yeah, just search Exploding Helicopter. You'll find us.
Yeah, it's and also you have a fantastic letterbox list of all the films that you know of that have exploding helicopters in, which I cannot believe that it Raptor or Raptor Island that you added recently.
Oh, it was, yeah. I think it's Raptor. It's kind of like another Carnosaur movie, but
Yeah,
kind of called Raptor. Yeah.
and it was a film that I had reviewed on my site, I believe. Or maybe I'm thinking of Raptor Island that I reviewed. Maybe I didn't review Raptor. I thought I had was sometimes these movies come up with because people will kind of ping you and say, hey, did you know this movie has an exploding helicopter in it? And you'll be like, oh no, I didn't. I missed that one or something like that. And sometimes they're movies that I have seen and reviewed and just didn't realize weren't on the list. And so it helps in a way because sometimes my percentage of the movies on that list goes up without me ever having to watch another thing because you just add one that I've already seen. But I think Raptor. Maybe I haven't seen Raptor. Maybe I need to see Raptor. I was thinking of Raptor Island, and I think
So it's got Eric Roberts in Raptor, and who's the? It's got another name in. I can't
Corbin
remember.
Burnson.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Arnie Becker
yeah,
himself.
exactly. When I look at the critic reviews, I don't see direct-to-video connoisseur, so that means I haven't seen it. That's how I know now whether I've seen a movie or not, is I just go to see if it's on the critic reviews, and so that'll tell me. So it's one I probably need to see now. I need to.
Well, it recycles quite a lot of footage from the connoisseur movie, so
Right.
you've probably actually seen Raptor already. You just don't realize it.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's got favorite of the site Tim Abel as well. So I know he likes working with Wynorski or Fred Olen Ray, and I think it's a Wynorski. Well, it's interesting. It's two directors, Jim Wynorski and John Blush. So did John Blush do all the non-Carnosaur sequences? Maybe that is that what happened?
Oh, I'm not. I can't remember. I'm not familiar enough with the connoisseur movies to kind of
Yeah, to
work
know.
out which. I think Wynorski shot some extra stuff.
Okay.
I think it's
Okay.
that
So
way round in
yeah.
order to make this, but maybe it's the other way around.
Yeah. Okay. So that makes sense. Maybe there'll be a Carnosaur 3 with Scott Eastwood and Weston Cage. Yeah, and maybe based on how well Madam Web did, maybe Dakota Johnson, daughter of Melanie Griffith and Don Johnson, will move down into direct-to-video movies as well.
They get who do you okay maybe we should wrap up on who do you think is the kind of a nepo baby who's currently successful but who's gonna have to that we suspect is gonna have to move down into the world of DTV.
Whew, boy, I
That
will.
is I know that's really that's actually quite a tough question.
No, but I think Dakota Johnson is doing a fantastic job of turning the dud that was Madam Web in her favor. So maybe she's not the one. Maybe she's not the one that we would think of. Yeah. So I'm trying to think of who else we have for Nepo Baby. I did a list and I kind of lost that list of like how many we have because it is quite a few. Quite a few kids in Hollywood. Or younger. I mean, some of them are like our age. That that have parents that did this as well. I mean, obviously Nicolas Cage is himself a Nepo baby, so
I tell you who a name has suddenly popped into my mind. I wonder if somebody like O'Shea Jackson Jr. Is going to is going to drop down into DVD DTV at some point.
yeah,
Because he's had some big, but I just feel he's got I just feel he's DTV.
yeah. No, he is perfect for like the Texas battle character sheriff in like I guess wouldn't be a Willis film anymore, but that kind of yeah, he could be that kind of or deputy. He'd be a good deputy in one of those movies. Yeah, he's definitely one I think that I would put in that category. That he's yeah, he's definitely moving in that direction.
So we should, if you run into him, tell him, look, enjoy your time in cinemas because you're coming into my world in the next 5 years.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I was trying to think if there's anybody else. I had one person that I was thinking of, and I can't think of who it was that I had that was again, possibly moving in that direction of direct to video stuff. But yeah, I mean, yeah, O'Shea Jackson, I think he's perfect for those movies. Yeah, he fits perfectly in them.
That's not what he wants to be hearing from his agent.
No, right. Yeah.
You're perfect for these Randall Emmett movies.
Well, he did Cocaine Bear, which I think is like
Dipping his toe in the waters, isn't it?
right. It's on the fringe, right? Like you're a few years out from that, and it really can go either way with these next few pictures. I think, right? It's one of those deals, the border between direct to video and not direct to video. It's a very thin line. That I don't think people realize how thin it is. I mean, Vin Diesel's the one I always bring up because if the fourth Fast and Furious movie didn't do as well as it did, I think if that had been a bomb, he would have been direct to video. I think that's how close he was at that point. And it ends up working out for him. And the next thing you know, the Fast and Furious series is like pulling in $1 billion, gates. But he was on that edge, and he could have easily tipped over if that movie does like 100 million in the theater as opposed to like 400 or 500, whatever it did. And I think he has Paul Walker to thank for that, because Paul Walker turns in a much better performance of that movie. But yeah, that's how close it is sometimes with these actors. I mean, I think The Rock is getting there. He could be moving in that direction. Probably more like direct to Hulu or direct to Netflix, but I think he's veering in that direction, and who knows if he just does wrestling instead, if it comes to that.
Well, yeah, because I mean, The Rock's had a few bombs, hasn't he,
Yeah.
lately? Although I was listening to something the other day that that Red One, is it Red One movie that he
Yeah.
did? I mean, it was very briefly in cinemas, but it's done like massive numbers for like Amazon on streaming, and so even though he'll still be a big name, even if he's not necessarily, if he does a streaming movie, he'll still be commanding like serious money in a way in which O'Shea Jackson won't be.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point that like Amazon could still use. I mean, you think of like Jake Gyllenhaal, who I think he's a Nepo baby, right? I think he and
Yeah,
his
his
yeah,
dad,
another
director.
right, exactly. Yeah. So but I think that they yeah, I think in his case, right, he does the Roadhouse movie, then he turns it into Prestige TV on Apple. And I don't think that's a place that The Rock could ever go. But I think you're right that like Amazon and Netflix are still going to have hundreds of millions of dollars to throw at action movies that they're just going to stream directly on their platform, and that's always probably going to be a place that he'll be able to live in before he get. I mean, they're still technically direct to video, but they're not really direct to video in the sense of like a 211 is direct to video. Like, I don't think he's probably going to have that same moment with a broken ankle in Bulgaria, reevaluating his life, maybe that Nicolas Cage had for 211.
Yeah, I mean, he's not going to have like Voltage Productions coming up at the start of his film, is he? So
Exactly. Yes. Yes. Which there's a piece of this that I kind of forgot to mention was that 211 only had the two they only had the two production companies. It was Millennium Films and some other one, whereas Dangerous had, I mean, I don't know how many did Dangerous have. It had five, I think, five or six. It's amazing, and they do five or six, and then they do in the opening credits they get their own credit lines as well.
it is a sort of I find the whole world of like those types of credits and like who gets a producer credit on these on films, like I find it probably more interesting than I really should. Just shows you what a sort of film nerd I am, that I was just like, okay, why are all these people, especially in this kind of era of DTV, like the sort of producer credits in particular have just gone insane, like
Right,
50,
exactly.
60 people.
Right, exactly. I guess it's because they get all the money from those places. Yeah. Now I need to point out also Red One. We have another Nepo baby, directed by Jake Kasdan, son of Lawrence Kasdan.
Under every rock, Matt, under every
Yeah,
rock.
it's amazing. It absolutely. This is like we've just sort of scratched the surface with this topic. Yeah, we
I mean,
now
what was I watching? I was watching I was watching Blood Fist 7, or was it Blood Fist 6? No, it was
I saw you
Blood.
watched them recently.
Yeah, it was. I think it was Blood Fist 6, which is the one set in the underground nuclear bunker,
Oh yes, yeah,
and even that had a Nepo baby in, because it had Vidal Sassoon's daughter in, who
yes,
kind of played acting for a few years before she died of a drugs overdose. But
yes.
yeah, it's just they're just everywhere.
Yes, exactly. Interesting. Is it six or seven? Might be seven. I thought it was six because I thought right she was great because doesn't she hold Steve Garvey, former baseball player who actually was running for Senate here in the United States in his state of California. So she was Katya Setsu. That's right. She was holding him at knife point. I think that's right.
So which
Yeah,
one was that?
Blood
Was
Fist
it six?
six. Yeah, it was
6.
6. Yeah. So Steve Garvey, the guy, the military guy who is like running the
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah.
yeah, if you look on his IMDb bio, it's got his picture of him playing baseball. And yeah, apparently during election night, Rachel Maddow, who hosts the election night coverage on MSNBC, she was told by her producers not to call him the baseball guy when he was running for Senate. But yeah, I believe he was on the 1981 championship team. But he's Steve Garvey. He's just but yeah, he's I mean yeah that Bonefist 6 is a great one because what is it? It's Die Hard in a nuclear silo, but also you've got like a general who like is sending blow up dolls to his female major that works under him, and that's just considered like he's a jerk, but not like this is losing your job as a general. It's like yeah, all kinds of
It was
stuff.
it was a better it was a better time, Matt. It was a better
It was.
time.
It was exactly. But yeah, you find the Nepo babies everywhere. So yeah, exactly. Well, Will, maybe this is a good place for us to leave it here. Thank you again for coming on. This was a lot of fun.
It's always a good time, Matt.
All right. And thank you everybody for listening. We'll talk again soon. Bye everyone. All right, we are